This happened in my early 20s. My name is Holly, and I work in a Burger King drive-thru to pay my bills. I ran away from home with my high school boyfriend, Mark. We thought about making a life here in LA, but as soon as we reached here, he changed drastically. He got into drugs, then got caught cheating, so my foolish teen self, who left high school and her family for love, went through a rough patch in the beginning years after shifting to LA. With no qualification and being a high school dropout, this is the only job that I could land on. I shared a room with another girl in a cheap apartment, and she was the one who helped me get this job. The drive-thru was located in a secluded area right across the highway. Though it was 10 minutes away from my house, I had to walk amidst the woods to get there. Hence, sometimes I had to work night shifts, and walk amidst the dark woods often made me nervous. I always carried pepper spray and a hunting knife in my bag so that I could at least defend myself in the worst situations possible. Luckily, I never had to use any of these for 8 months straight after joining until one time, which I'm about to share with you all. It was a summer evening and I was going for my night shift. I could hear the frogs and crickets singing as I made my way through the woods. The eerie background music, accompanied by my footsteps crushing the dry leaves, made me feel I wasn't alone. I was constantly looking back out of discomfort, thinking someone was following me, but not once did I see a single person. When I reached the highway and saw the Burger King banner shining on the drive-thru setup, my breathing got normal. I crossed the road and walked in. This happened to be a small outlet, hence 3 employees worked 3 shifts in turn. The guy who worked before me came out and handed me the keys. We chatted for a bit about work and stuff, then he went home riding his scooter. I stood near the window of the counter and watched his blue motorcycle fade out in the dark. Suddenly, my phone rang, and I saw it was my roommate, Missy. "Did you reach?" "Yes. Safely. Again. Good for you." Missy always checked on me in her cute way, and I couldn't thank her enough for being so caring the entire time I stayed with her. So after the previous guy left, I sat down on the counter and started looking at my phone. Generally, on weekdays, the sales happen to be less in the night shifts. It's mostly 3 to 4 customers. For the next 3 hours, 5 customers came in. I watched some videos on YouTube for a while, then probably dozed off in my seat. It was around 1:30 in the morning when a loud car horn honked right next to my window, and I almost jumped from my seat. I saw a green Chevy standing near the window and a man sitting on the driver's seat wearing beach shorts and nothing else. He wore 3 to 4 gold chains and red sunglasses. The entire appearance made him look so odd and funny at the same time. Even though it was a warm summer night, there wasn't any reason for this man to go shirtless. Without wasting any more time, I said in a humble voice, "Welcome to Burger King. May I take your order, please?" "That's what I've been waiting for the last few minutes." I got extremely embarrassed, realizing I dozed off during my shift. "Oh, I am sorry. I was just a bit tired. Excuse me for this mistake." "Let it be. Just take the order." Thinking he had already waited enough, I stopped beating around the bush and started to take his order without any chit-chat. 2 single barbecue beef bacon, 3 Whoppers with cheese, onion rings, 6-piece nuggets, French fries, and a Hershey's sundae pie. I was a bit confused seeing such a huge order for a single person, but then I thought, it's none of my business. I told him to give me some time to prepare his order. He didn't say anything, just smiled and sat in his car. Needless to say, that was the biggest order of the night, so I got a bit restless. Also, I have wasted his time already, which makes me fidget more in my duty. As if all this tension wasn't enough, the guy kept watching me like a hawk. He was scanning my every move. Realizing I will take some more time, he played loud rap music in his car to kill his time. If it was other times, I surely would have told him to turn it off, but I kept my calm and went on with my work. I could see him smiling at me and checking me out in a very creepy way. After finishing and packing his entire order, I handed him over a big bag filled with food. He rushed his fingers through my wrist while taking the order from me. I calculated his bill and handed him the slip to make the payment. Without taking his eyes off me, he took out his wallet and said, "You know, a girl like you shouldn't be working so hard. What's your name?" It's fine. I like this job. Also, I don't feel very comfortable providing personal information to strangers." My outright rejection shocked him, as he wasn't expecting me to be so confrontational in his face. A surprised anger lurked in his wide eyes, and he took out dollar bills from his wallet. What he did next was beyond any human being's imagination. Before handing me the dollars, he spat on his palms, then rubbed the spit on both sides of his hands and the dollar notes while giving a cruel, mean smile. I was completely disgusted with this behavior, so I screamed, "What the hell is wrong with you?" With me, I wasn't being rude, even though you made me wait. Then why didn't you answer like that when I asked your name? If you want to be rude with me, then this is what you get, lady. Listen, scumbag, if you give me this lady shit one more time, I will smash the ketchup machine in your face. Now, either you pay me like a human being or I am calling the cops on you. I already have your plate number and footage in the security cam, so what's it gonna be? He lifted his body out of the car window and came extremely near my face. I was about to shit my pants, but I still kept my firm demeanor to show him that I am not scared of him. Giving me a crooked smile, he said, "You don't know who you are threatening, lady. Anyways, let's do it your way." He handed me his wallet and said, "Take as much as you want, and don't worry, I won't even lay my hands on your dirty skin for that." Tears rolled down my eyes, and without saying anything, I slapped him hard on the face. Receiving a tight slap, he got shaken immediately and pulled himself back in the car. I then shut the window so that he couldn't reach out to me again. "You bitch! I was being nice to you, and this is how you paid me? This world sucks up girls like you, you know? One day, you are alive, and the next day, your body will be found chopped off in those dark woods. You will pay for this." Saying this, he drove off at full speed, and I collapsed on the floor, sobbing terribly. After crying a pool of tears, I managed to call the owner and then my roommate. The owner apologized to me and told me to go home immediately. He said he will report this guy to the police first thing in the morning. Missy told me to come home ASAP. Without wasting any more time, I got my stuff, locked the outlet, and started to walk home. For the first time in my life, walking amidst these woods, I felt like I will die in here. The sound of a hooting owl made my heart skip a beat each time. I went on for 7 minutes straight without any trouble, but suddenly, a bush nearby started to shake violently. Shocking the hell out of me, that crazy customer came out from that bush. His face was smeared with mustard and ketchup, which made him look insane. No doubt, he ate the food he bought a few moments back. He then laughed at me and said, "Here comes the big bash." And saying this, he shoved his hand inside his mouth and started to gag bizarrely. It took me some moments to realize what he was up to. He gagged like this for a bit more and then started vomiting like crazy. Everything that he ordered came out in its worst form. The even more psychotic thing was how he laughed in between his puking parade. A foul stench of vomit filled the air around me, and screaming at the top of my lungs, I started to run like crazy. I had no idea where I was going. I just ran as far as I could from this freak show. I must have fainted from the trauma, and a patrolling police car spotted me lying unconscious on the side of the highway. When I woke up at the hospital, all I could do was cry, realizing that I am still alive. I don't know what that man tried to do that night, but I no longer take night shifts in Burger King.
I'm extremely terrified, but thankful at the same time. Terrified because I got abducted by a psycho freak, but thankful because along with me, I could save 2 more lives from receiving the sickest and most painful death. My name is Kyle, and I will never be able to celebrate Christmas with an innocent mind for the rest of my life. Every year, the people of my town gather in the huge community hall for a long-awaited Christmas party. We have a small fair in the garden of the community hall. We eat all the chocolates that we want. We sing carols, and toddlers perform little plays about the miracle of Christmas. It was the night of Christmas Eve. We all gathered in the community hall. Kids were running around, dressed in Santa hats. A fat Santa Claus was roaming around, tolling his big shiny bell. Christmas songs were playing over the speakers. I loved the entire scene. I walked into a stall in the corner that was selling sugar cookie rainbow bars. All the kids gathered near the stall, and the owner was having a tough time handling them. I'm a bit short for 10 years old, so it was becoming more difficult for me to grab a rainbow bar for myself while managing the crowd. After being pushed and shoved like a rag doll, I left the stalls in frustration, spent my money on a silly little keychain instead, and sat on a bench some distance away. The bench was under a big tree that was covered in snow, creating a shadowy atmosphere in that particular spot. Everyone was having fun, except me. I was thinking of going home, playing video games, when I heard rustling footsteps behind me. Turning around, I didn't see anyone, but slowly, a face came out of the darkness. "You don't seem to enjoy Christmas very much, huh?" The person speaking came out of the dark and sat right next to me. He was a man whose age I couldn't guess due to his weird outfit. The man was wearing a Willy Wonka costume and had a silver cane in his hand, just like I'd seen in the movies. But unlike the funny Willy Wonka in the movie, this man looked like a creepier version of the fictional character. His eyes were wide and still, like a dead fish. There were dark circles around them, which made his face even spookier. His pointy nose, accompanied by a sharp jaw, hinted at something going on inside his mind. He licked his dry lips and said, "Aren't you going to answer my question?" "No, I'm just bored. Who are you? I've never seen you here before." "Well, my house is inside those woods. I enjoy being in the crowd a lot." Considering his words in the moment, I said, "Yeah, you don't say." "What's your name?" "I'm Kyle. Why are you dressed like Willy Wonka? I mean, it's not Halloween, you know." "I just find myself quite similar to his character." "You mean you have a chocolate factory too?" "Yes, and there are tons of sugar cookie rainbow bars and lots of other Christmas candies as well. Would you like to come for a visit?" I would have refused him right away, but at the moment, I wanted to get out of there, so I agreed to his proposal, and he started to walk into the woods. The forest floor was covered with crystal white snow. The pale moonlight made the scene look like a dream. "You still didn't tell me your name." "You ask so many questions. Anyway, you can call me Mr. Wonka." "Come on, we both know that can't be your real name." "But that's what you will call me." "Okay, Mr. Wonka." I immediately got silent because I didn't want to irritate him further. I really wanted some candy, so I followed him quietly. He stopped in front of a big house. Though the house was huge, it seemed abandoned to me. Saplings and wild ivy were growing on the wall. The dull texture of the wood smelt soggy and rotten. "This is where you live?" "It only looks old from the outside. Come on, let's go in." He walked a few steps ahead of me and opened the door of the house. There was pitch black darkness on the other side of the door, and I realized what a huge mistake I'd made by following this man into such a secluded area. My parents didn't know I was there, and seeing the condition of the house, there was no doubt he was planning something really bad for me. I think I better go. I'll come some other time. My parents will be worried." "Where do you think you're going? You can leave when I say you can." Before I could scream, he hit me hard with his metal cane and knocked me out on the floor. When I came back to my senses, my head was throbbing in pain. I found myself sitting in a big dining room, tied to a pillar. In front of me, there were 2 other pillars as well, and 2 other kids were tied to them too. Both of them looked severely dehydrated. They were younger than me. Their dirty clothes indicated that they'd been there like this for a long time. "Rise and shine, little ones." Why? Why are you doing this? What do you want?" "Questions and questions and questions." He splashed water on my face and said, "You can all leave when your parents bring me the money without giving me any trouble. No one worries about spending money at Christmas, so why the hell is it so difficult for me to get my share?" "The cops will find you, you know. My parents are probably looking for me right now, and they'll come here." "Are you threatening me, Kyle? I don't think you will, after you see this." He pressed a button on the wall, and with a rustling sound of chains being pulled, an iron cage that I hadn't noticed until now came down from the tall ceiling of the house. In that iron cage lay the body of a kid, probably my age, except he or she wasn't alive anymore. The kid's face was beyond recognition. At first glance, one might have felt like the kid died from burning, but there was some gooey, foul-smelling liquid stuck to its corpse, like superglue. The psycho smiled and pointed to a big cauldron to my left. "You see that? That's my secret chocolate recipe. If you try to do anything that you shouldn't, I'll throw you alive inside that boiling hot chocolate, just like this little menace. This is what you get when you act smart with Mr. Wonka." After saying this, he went out of the room, and I sat there sweating in fear. The faces of my parents flashed in front of my eyes as I realized I might never see them again. But then I remembered I'd bought that keychain from the fair. The keychain had a sharp edge, and my hands were tied with old, torn clothes. Without wasting a single second, I took out the keychain from my back pocket and started rubbing it on the knot binding my hands. After a minute of relentless trying, I finally succeeded and set myself free. I could have run away and saved myself, but I wanted to save those 2 kids and punish this man for what he did to the dead kid. A plan kicked in my mind. I slowly walked to the boiling cauldron and dipped a piece of ragged cloth into the foul-smelling chocolate. I spread the liquid chocolate all over the floor so that it created a slippery slope. Then, I patiently waited behind a pillar for the freak to come out. After 5 minutes of waiting, I heard his footsteps, and he came out. Realizing I'd set myself free, he started screaming, "You little piglet! I know you're still in here, 'cause I locked the front door and there's no other way out. You better come out, or I'll make your life a nightmare." He was screaming as he looked behind the pillars for me. As soon as he came to check the pillar right next to the boiling cauldron, I jumped up and pushed him with all my strength, piercing my eardrums with a spine-chilling scream. He fell into the boiling pot of chocolate. His flesh started to melt away, but he still tried to get out. He flailed his hands in the air, trying to escape this inhumane death trap, but I just watched him die. When he stopped screaming and flailing, I realized he was dead. Not having a key, I started looking for a window that wasn't boarded up, through which I could get out and help these 2 other dying kids. Luckily, there was one uncovered window. I shattered the glass with a strong kick, jumped out, and ran back to the fairground. By then, everyone was calling out my name. My mom was running everywhere in a panic looking for me. Seeing me come out of the woods with terror in my face, they realized something horrible had happened. The cops were called, and the kids were rescued, but I'm still shaking. God knows what would have happened if I hadn't had that keychain. Dying in a boiling pot of chocolate, and on Christmas Eve, that would have been the most gruesome way to go.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the video. If so, please leave a like. And also, a small percentage of people that watch my videos are actually subscribed. If you want to support this channel and make this channel reach the 1 million mark, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can change your mind later. Enjoy. I work as a mall center during the holidays. It's a lot more profitable than you'd think. I'm a little on the young side as far as mall centers go, but that just means I have more stamina than most, and a bit of makeup helps me look as good as any other Santa Claus roaming around at this time of year. One year, a familiar-looking girl came to sit on my lap like a dozen other kids had that day. I'd seen her around the mall plenty of times before during days when I was shopping for my costume. She was the daughter of a single receptionist who worked in the mall just on the floor above mine, so I'd often see her come by to visit her mother. The girl looked just like her mother, with golden blonde hair and the bluest eyes I've ever seen. She would have looked like a perfect little cherub, if not for the band-aids on her face. "Well, hello there, young lady. What might your name be?" "Charlotte, though my friends call me Charlie." "Well, Charlie, how are you feeling this Christmas?" "I'm doing great. My mom promised to watch a movie with me tonight." "That's great to hear. She sounds like a nice young lady. Now, I hope you've been nice this year." "I have. Can't say the same for other kids in my neighborhood, though." "No. Why would you say that?" "Well, there's this one kid in my neighborhood who picks on me constantly. He thinks he's better than everyone else because he lives in the biggest house on the street. He picks on me whenever he sees me walking past his house. Yesterday, he even threw a rock at me and I fell down on my face." "Is that why you have those band-aids on your face?" "Yeah, but it doesn't hurt anymore. I wish he'd stop picking on me, though." "Oh, he will. If you just believe in the magic of Christmas. Santa will make sure that that bully will never pick on you again. Really? Really. I promise. Charlie's mother came to pick her up after a while. I waved goodbye to her, and she waved back as her mother led her out of the mall. The next year, I was back in that same mall, pretending to be Santa Claus for the kids again, when Charlie came up to me. Well, hello, Charlie. It's been a while, hasn't it? I came to thank you. Your Christmas magic worked. I'm glad to hear that. How's the boy who was picking on you last year? I don't know, and I don't care. I haven't seen him since last Christmas. He doesn't even come to school anymore. I see. He must have realized that being naughty wouldn't get him any gifts from Santa. Speaking of which, how are you doing in school? I'm doing all right, but, well, there's this one new teacher at school I don't like. Now, Charlie, teachers may seem strict at times, but they want nothing but to see you grow and learn. I get that, but he's a little creepy when he's alone with me. He likes to touch me in places that make me feel weird. Don't tell anyone, though. He told me he'd give me an F if I ever told anyone about our private lessons. Ah, I see. Don't worry, Charlie. Your secret's safe with Santa. Just believe in the magic of Christmas and everything will be fine. Santa will make sure of it. Really? Really. I promise. 1 year later, I saw Charlie coming into the mall with her mother on Christmas Day once again. Her mother wasn't working that night, but allowed her daughter to explore the mall while she went to the supermarket section to shop for groceries. She was far away, so I couldn't really tell, but I could have sworn Charlie's mother had a black eye when she entered. Charlie ran right up to me and sat on my lap the same way she did for the past 2 years. However, she wasn't smiling like she did the last 2 times. I met her. She seemed worried and unnaturally serious for a child her age. Is there something wrong, Charlie? Santa, can I use the magic of Christmas to help someone else this year? Oh, who is that you want to help? My mom. She got married last year, but I don't like her new husband very much. And why is that? He hits her when he thinks I'm not looking, but I can still hear them. My mom won't talk about it, and I'm getting worried about her. Can Christmas magic make him stop hitting her? Of course it can, if you believe in it enough. Really? Really. I promise. Charlie's smile returned to her face when I said that. I was glad. A smile fits her face much better than a frown. The rest of the day went by as normal. I entertained a bunch of other kids, though Charlie was always on my mind. At the end of the day, I went into my car, still in my Santa costume, and drove to Charlie's house. She never told me where she and her mother lived, but it was easy enough to figure out after looking into her mom's social media. I parked my car across the house and waited for the lights in the bedroom to turn off. I knew this would be my hardest Christmas wish to grant yet, so I was being extra careful. When the lights turned off, hours later, I took off the fake Santa belly that made me look fatter than I actually was and approached the house. I climbed up the house using the windowsills and exposed bricks as footholds. I wasn't very tall, so I reached the top fairly quickly. Like a proper Santa Claus, I lowered myself into the house itself through the chimney. It was tight and uncomfortable, but I grit my teeth and went through. When I reached the bottom, I emerged to see the dark living room of the house. The only light in the room was the TV that was still playing some cheesy Christmas special. And passed out on the couch in front of it was a man who I assumed must have been Charlie's stepfather. I couldn't believe my luck. I thought I'd have to wait until he needed to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night for me to confront him alone. And yet, there he was, just sleeping on the couch like a neatly gift-wrapped present. Maybe there really was something to this Christmas magic thing after all. I calmly approached the man sleeping on the couch, walked behind him, and slit his throat with a pocket knife. He tried to scream, but I had my hand firmly over his mouth, so nothing but murmurs came out. He bled out, and the blood that splattered onto me disappeared into the red fabric of my Santa costume. I didn't mind Charlie's mother marrying, But I'd be damned if I let it be someone like him. Charlie didn't know it, and I doubt her mother knew it either. But I was her real father. She was born as a result of a drunken one-night stand I had with her mother during a company Christmas party at the mall years back. Though I was the only one sober enough to remember it in detail. I couldn't afford to pay child support, so I never told her mother about who I was. So I decided to help her by granting her Christmas wishes instead. 2 years ago, I killed and buried her bully in her park. Last year, I tortured her pedophile teacher and threw his body in a river. And this year, I'm helping her mother escape her abusive husband by framing a burglar. I can never be a part of Charlie's life, but once in a while, during the most magical time of year, I can afford to give her a little gift in the spirit of Christmas. This happened in recent times, so excuse me if I sound confused and terrified while sharing. It was a warm Friday night, and I couldn't sleep even after trying for an hour. I came out to the living room to watch something on Netflix. I live in a ground floor apartment. The big window behind the living room couch opened up towards the woods. But I watch enough scary stories, so living alone near woods never bothered me so far. I didn't have air conditioning in my apartment, so I switched on the ceiling fan and opened the windows for ventilation. I poured a bucket of nachos and mayonnaise dip before sitting for a scary Netflix movie. As I played a movie, the cool breeze from the forest touched my neck. I could hear the chorus of crickets. It has been almost an hour. I was completely grooving in the movie when I heard sounds of dry leaves rustling in the woods. I turned around and didn't see anyone. A big owl hooted in the branch nearby, and I felt I am the only human being awake with these night creatures. I put a handful of nachos inside of my mouth and started munching on them ruthlessly. The movie I watched showed a deaf girl being alone in the house while an intruder breaks in. I know what you're thinking. Is she insane? No, I'm not. But as I said, I am used to watching scary movies late night. I am not a very sound sleeper. So, I was eating and watching the movie when I heard a creepy cackle echoing in the forest. I immediately turned around. My eyes got fixated on the narrow path going into the woods. Don't know why. A few seconds went by, then the echoing laughter started to go loud. It took me a few seconds more to realize that the sound of laughter is coming close. Suddenly, I saw a man rushing to my house at full speed, wearing a trench coat and a baseball cap. He was of average height and a little overweight. Seeing him hovering towards my window like a crazy psycho, I got up from the couch. I threw the nacho tub on the floor and started to close the window, shaking in fear. The man was a few inches away when I slammed shut my windows. He stopped right there. Even though he was so close, I couldn't see his face. The baseball cap created a shadow on his face. All I could see was his rusty, dark lips. He stood there like a statue, and then his mouth formed a crooked smile. I could see his rotten yellow teeth. Whoever he is, he doesn't seem like a nice guy. I understood that very clearly. My heart was beating like drums when the man said something, moving his lips. But I couldn't hear anything. He was going on rambling something inaudible. Then, he started to walk towards the left of my house and disappeared behind the walls. I always locked my doors and windows before going to bed, so I was relieved thinking that at least he can't get inside. I sat down and paused the movie. The entire house was in darkness. The light from the TV was my only source to look around. I wanted to go and switch on the lights, but fear of death grabbed my feet too tightly to move. I took a few deep breaths and then started to look for my phone. I must call 911 before anything more happens. I noticed my phone was on the floor, which I threw away while throwing the nachos in shock. And due to the heavy throw, the front screen was shattered into pieces. My cell phone is the only phone in the house. Realizing that I can't even call 911 made my heartbeat become even faster. I crouched down on the floor and prayed to God to make this man go away. I thought if I waited for some hours, it would be morning soon, and then I can go out and ask for help. I'm the only tenant in this small 2-story apartment. The other tenants were supposed to come tomorrow. My friend Rita told me to stay with her tonight, but I didn't listen. Who thought I will start living Netflix content in real life, that too, in the middle of the night? I don't remember what time it was, but I slowly got up and played back the TV. I didn't want to give that guy any idea that he scared the hell out of me. The movie started to play again. Half an hour went by without any trouble. I thought to go to my room and try to contact 911 through my laptop. I walked into my room as quiet as possible. The laptop was right next to the study table, near the window. I was about to pick it up when I heard a slow breathing sound outside my window. I opened the curtain, and that creepy man was standing there, pressing his entire face on the window and staring right into my soul. Let me in. His voice gave my bones chills, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. I ran to the living room and collapsed on the floor, crying heavily. The man's laughter got louder, hearing me sob, and he started to bang on the glass window, screaming, "Let me in! Let me in! Let me in!" But before he could finish his words, I heard a female voice in the passage outside my apartment. "Dad! Dad, where are you?" I sprung in joy, thinking the neighbors upstairs may have finally arrived. I ran to the main door and opened it. A girl younger than me, probably in her high school years, stood outside my apartment with a confused face. I said in a sobbing voice, "There's a man trying to break in. My phone is not working. Please, call the cops." "What? Relax, relax. Where is he? Show me." "In my bedroom. He's standing outside of my window." The girl went straight to my room, and what she did next almost gave me a heart attack. She opened the bedroom window and helped that man get inside my apartment. I screamed in fear. "Are you two going to kill me now?" "What? No. This is my dad, for God's sake, not some fugitive. He suffers from some delusion. I am sorry you had to meet us like this. We are your next door neighbors. He likes watching Netflix all day, but all our furniture is arriving tomorrow. Somehow he got out of the apartment and was wandering outside. Maybe he saw you watching TV, so he came here. I apologize for all the inconvenience." She looked at her dad with a really embarrassing face, and the man stared at my TV without saying anything more. He wasn't even noticing either of us. His eyes were stuck to the screen. I understood this girl was telling the truth. She then took her father away. While walking out of my apartment, her father went on staring at the screen. Just before disappearing in the passage outside, his eyes shifted towards me and he gave me one last crooked smile and said something inaudible that somehow felt like he was saying, "I'll be back." I left the place the next day and since then, never met that girl or her psycho father. I am very sure the man is putting on a show, an act of mental illness to hide his evil self in front of his innocent daughter. So, if you live on the outskirts of Minnesota, then don't open your windows at night. This happened last year on Hanukkah. Coming from a deeply rooted Jewish family, I can tell without a shadow of a doubt that tradition means a lot in our culture. My mother loves cooking and feeding everyone, and last year's Hanukkah happened to be special. It was my first Hanukkah after Bar Mitzvah. Hence, the celebration was at its peak. The dining table was filled with all the special dishes that we Jews love from the bottom of our hearts. There was sofkin yod, a kind of donut with jelly filling inside, latkes, most commonly known as potato pancakes, and brisket, a large piece of beef slow cooked with all the special spices. There was wine, beer, bourbon. In a few words, too many foods and too many drinks on the same table. Even though we had a small family, our joy and laughter made the house echo in merriment. My dad died when I was a toddler, and since then, my mom and my grandpa raised me with all their love. We sat down and raised a glass, cheering. Happy Hanukkah. Being a food lover, my grandfather started to eat a lot. Keeping in mind his old age, my mom told him to slow down on the brisket, but he was unstoppable that night. After a delicious dinner, we all bid goodnight to each other and went to bed. Around 1:30 in the morning, I got up feeling thirsty. I walked downstairs to the kitchen to get water from the jug. It was a moonlit night, and the pale rays of moonlight were coming from the kitchen window, making the area perfectly visible. Hence, I didn't feel the need to switch on the kitchen light. I stopped near the small table and poured myself a glass of water. As I took the first sip, my eyes went to the left side of the kitchen floor, and the glass fell from my hand, shattering into pieces. My grandpa was lying on the floor dead. His mouth was open, eyes were bulging out, and he was covered in his own vomit. My eyes were stuck in his terrifying wide eyes. I wanted to scream for help, but for a few seconds, I couldn't move a muscle. "Mom, help!" Hearing my cry for help, she rushed downstairs and switched on the kitchen light. We found out that this Hanukkah was Grandpa's last meal that eventually killed him. Due to excessive food, he suffered serious indigestion and died choking on his own vomit. His room was right beside the kitchen, so maybe he tried to come out and call for us, but fate didn't spare him any more time. My mom and I grieved for some hours, and then we realized we have to do the needful. The only relative of ours lives 3 hours away from our house. We called them, but due to a heavy night of celebration, we guessed everyone was dead asleep. My mom and I cleaned the vomit and placed him on his bed. She then sat me down and said, "Isaac, I must drive to your uncle's house and bring them here. But we both can't leave your grandpa like this. We have to perform the vigil. Tonight, you must be the shomer and chant the Tehillim until I come back." Being a minor, there's no way I could drive and bring my uncle here, so I realized I have a serious responsibility tonight. Who would have thought a happy night of Hanukkah will turn into a vigil? For those who aren't aware of this ritual, let me tell you, it's our way of honoring the dead. When a Jew dies, a watch is kept over the body and Tehillim is recited constantly until the burial service. Vigils extend from eventual death to burial, ritualistically to pray for a loved one, but more so their body is never left alone. The one who keeps watch over the dead is known as a shomer, and he must stay awake the entire night and go on with his prayers. My mom wiped her tears and hugged me. She said, "You can do this. Don't be afraid. Grandpa loved you." The thought of being alone in the entire house with the dead body of my grandpa shook me from the core. I was just a 13-year-old boy with no experience in this case whatsoever. So, in the next 5 minutes, I stood at our house porch and watched my mom drive away with sobbing eyes. As I came inside and locked the door, I could hear the deep silence echoing around me. I have never felt this quiet in my entire life. A house where hours earlier, people laughed in joy, sunk in deep despair with sudden death. I sat down near my grandpa's bed and started to read prayers from the book of Psalms. Seeing my grandpa just lying there with his eyes closed made me feel extremely uncomfortable. Though I knew he is dead, I couldn't help but think maybe he will wake up soon and say this was all just a Hanukkah prank. But the truth hits harder than anything in this world. The big clock in our living room rang twice, and I realized it's 2 a.m. It felt like the night was too long. I remembered how my mom told me to keep on praying and stay awake until she comes back, but being tired and alone, I don't remember when I dozed off. I don't remember how long I was asleep, but suddenly I heard the sound of utensils rattle in the kitchen, which woke me up. I rubbed my eyes and was about to get back to the prayers when I noticed my grandpa's bed. For the last few hours, the body that was lying on this bed right in front of me wasn't there anymore. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I slowly turned my head towards the door of this room leading to the kitchen. The sound of utensils was still coming from the kitchen. I yelled, "Grandpa, is that you?" But then my senses kicked in. How can it be him? He's dead. I got up trembling in fear and came out of the room. The long corridor stood in front of me, leading to the kitchen and the living room. There were drops of blood on the floor. My heartbeat got faster, and I felt something awful was waiting for me on the other side of the corridor. Somehow I managed to walk to the kitchen and saw my grandpa sitting on the floor, facing his back at me and eating something from the dustbin underneath the sink. For a moment, I thought maybe he is still alive. I mean, things like that do happen. Maybe his heart stopped for a while, and now he's back with us just like before. Overwhelmed with joy and relief, I shouted, "Grandpa, You're alive! Mom and I were so..." But before I could finish, my grandpa turned his face toward me, and what I saw will remain in my nightmares forever. His eyes were completely white with no pupils in them, and his skin was bloodless, just like a dead body. His hands and his face were smeared with blood. He was holding a dead rat with his entrails pulled out. Some of his intestines were still hanging from the edge of his mouth. He swooped them in like hot noodles and said in a demonic voice, "I'm hungry," and shoved the rest of the mouse inside his mouth and started chewing it like his favorite piece of brisket. I screamed and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. I crouched on the floor and started to pray in my sobbing voice. I wished my mom to come back as soon as possible. Whatever was eating that dead mouse can't be my grandpa, that's for sure. I knew it was my fault that I couldn't keep watch and fell asleep, but I never anticipated the situation to take this horrible turn. I prayed and probably fainted on the floor. I woke up 2 days later in the hospital. By then, my grandpa was already buried, following our tradition and ritual. My mom and uncle visited me in the hospital and gave me the quite shocking news. When they returned home, they found Grandpa lying on the bed. He had blood stains on his face and mouth, which didn't make any sense. Then they found my room locked and had to break in, thinking something bad has happened to me. As I lay on the hospital bed, terrified with the shock, I couldn't tell them what exactly happened that night. That was my first and last time being a showman. Every Hanukkah, this scary incident revisits me in my dreams, and I see my dead grandpa standing near my bed saying, "I'm hungry." At 2:28 p.m. on August 28, 2003, a middle-aged pizza delivery man named Brian Wells walked into a PNC bank in Erie, Pennsylvania. He had a short cane in his right hand and a strange bulge under the collar of his t-shirt. Wells, 46 and balding, passed the teller a note. "Gather employees with access codes to vault and work fast to fill the bag with $250,000, it said. "You only have 15 minutes. Then he lifted his shirt to reveal a heavy box-like device dangling from his neck. According to the note, it was a bomb. The teller, who told Wells there was no way to get into the vault at that time, filled a bag with cash, $8,702, and handed it over. Wells walked out, sucking on a dum-dum lollipop he grabbed from the counter, hopped into his car, and drove off. He didn't get far. Some 15 minutes later, state troopers spotted Wells standing outside his Geo Metro in a nearby parking lot, surrounded him, and tossed him to the pavement, cuffing his hands behind his back. Wells told the troopers that while out on a delivery, he had been accosted by a group of black men who chained the bomb around his neck at gunpoint and forced him to rob the bank. "It's gonna go off," he told them in desperation. "I'm not lying." The officers called the bomb squad and took position behind their cars. Guns were drawn. For 25 minutes, Wells remained seated on the pavement, his legs curled beneath him. "Did you call my boss?" Wells asked the trooper at one point, apparently concerned that his employer would think he was shirking his duties. Suddenly, the device started to emit an accelerating beeping noise. Wells fidgeted. It looked like he was trying to scoot backwards to somehow escape the bomb strapped to his neck. Beep, beep, beep. Boom. The device detonated, blasting him violently onto his back and ripping a 5-inch gash in his chest. The pizza delivery man took a few last gasps and died on the pavement. It was 3:18 p.m. The bomb squad arrived 3 minutes later. The police began sorting through a trove of physical evidence. In Wells' car, they discovered the 2-foot-long cane, which turned out to be an ingeniously crafted homemade gun. The bomb itself was likewise a marvel of DIY design and construction. The device consisted of 2 parts: a triple-banded metal collar with 4 keyholes and a 3-digit combination lock, and an iron box containing 2 6-inch pipe bombs loaded with double-base smokeless powder. The hinged collar locked around Wells' neck like a giant handcuff. Investigators could tell that it had been built using professional tools. The device also contained 2 Sunbeam kitchen timers and 1 electric countdown timer. It had wires running through it that connected to nothing. The contraption was a puzzle in and of itself. The most perplexing and intriguing pieces of evidence, though, were the handwritten notes that investigators found inside Wells' car, addressed to the bomb hostage. The notes instructed Wells to rob the bank of $250,000, then follow a set of complex instructions to find various keys and combination codes hidden throughout Erie. It contained drawings, threats, and detailed maps. If Wells did as he was told, the instructions promised he'd wind up with the keys and the combination required to free him from the bomb. Failure or disobedience would result in certain death. There is only one way you can survive, and that is to cooperate completely. The notes read in meticulous lettering that would later stymie handwriting analysis. This powerful booby-trapped bomb can be removed only by following our instructions. Act now, think later, or you will die. It seemed that whoever planned the robbery had also constructed a nightmarish scavenger hunt for Wells, in which the prize was his life. It all started at 1:30 p.m. on the day of the robbery at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria, where Wells was working. An order came in for 2 small sausage and pepperoni pies to be delivered to a location on the outskirts of the city. Even though he was at the end of his shift, he agreed to deliver the order. He walked out of the shop, 2 pies in hand, at about 2 p.m. The delivery location, reachable only by a dirt road, was a TV transmission tower site in a wooded area off of busy Peach Street. Arriving at the location, Wells was accosted at gunpoint by strangers and forced to participate in a crazy bank robbery involving an even sicker scavenger hunt and some terrible consequences. The next day, a reporter and a photographer for the Erie Times News headed to the tower. The dirt road leading there was cordoned off by authorities, but the journalist spotted a tall, heavy-set man in denim Carhartt overalls pacing in front of a home that sat right next to it. His backyard extended almost to the transmission tower. The man identified himself as Bill Rothstein. Rothstein, 59, was an unmarried handyman and a lifelong resident of the area. He spoke elegantly, like someone who takes great pride in his mastery of the English language. Bill Rothstein may have appeared to be just a man who owned a house next to a TV tower, but he turned out to be hiding a dark secret. On September 20th, less than a month after the bomb killed Wells, Rothstein called 911. At 8645 Peach Street, in the garage, there is a frozen body. He told the police dispatcher, referring to his address. It's in the freezer. Within hours of making the call, Rothstein was in custody. He told the cops that he had been in agony for weeks. He had considered killing himself, he told them, and had gone so far as to write a suicide note, which investigators found inside a desk at his home. Writing in black marker, Rothstein expressed his apologies to those who cared for or about me, identified the body in his freezer as that of Jim Roden, and noted that he did not kill him nor participate in his death. The note opened with a curious disclaimer. This has nothing to do with the Wells case. Over the next 2 days, Rothstein explained to police how a dead man came to be in his freezer. In mid-August, he said he received a phone call from his ex-girlfriend, Marjorie Dill Armstrong. Who he had dated in the 1960s and early 1970s. Dill Armstrong told him that she had shot her live-in boyfriend, James Roden, in the back with a Remington 12-gauge shotgun in a dispute over money. Now she needed help removing the body and cleaning up the scene inside her Erie home, about 10 miles from Rothstein's place. Rothstein did what she asked. He kept the corpse in a chest freezer in his garage for 5 weeks. He painstakingly melted down the murder weapon and scattered the pieces around Erie County. But Rothstein said he couldn't go through with the plan to grind up the body, and he called 911 because he was afraid of what Dill Armstrong might do to him. On September 21st, the day after Rothstein called 911, Dill Armstrong was arrested for the murder of Roden. 16 months later, in January 2005, she pleaded guilty but was mentally ill and was sentenced to 7 to 20 years in state prison. Later, she admitted that she knew about it, that she had supplied the kitchen timers that were used in the bomb, and that she was within a mile of the bank at the time of the robbery. She also said that Wells, the dead pizza delivery guy, was not just a victim, but had been in on the plan. And so was Rothstein, the man who turned her in for Rodden's murder. She asserted he had masterminded the whole thing. But even as Dill Armstrong pointed the finger at Rothstein, she was implicating herself. Investigators had begun to suspect that Dill Armstrong was behind the collar bomb plot. Then, in late 2005, a witness came forward to say an ex-television repairman turned crack dealer named Kenneth Barnes was also involved. Barnes, an old fishing buddy of Dill Armstrong, had spoken too freely about the plan, and his brother-in-law had turned him in while Barnes was already in jail on unrelated drug charges, threatened with even more time behind bars. Barnes confirmed the Fed's belief that Dill Armstrong was the mastermind behind the collar bomb plot. He claimed she needed the cash so that she could pay him to kill her father, who she believed was blowing through his fortune. Dill Armstrong and Barnes were charged with carrying out the sensational crime, a plot that Dill Armstrong had put into motion, and Wells, the purported victim, was another. Pulling together information culled from more than 1,000 interviews over almost 4 years, the indictment charged that Wells was in on the scheme from the beginning. He had agreed to rob the bank wearing what he thought was a fake bomb. The scavenger hunt, he was told, was simply a ruse to fool the cops. If he got caught, he could point to the menacing instructions as evidence that he was merely following orders. But over time, Buchanan said Wells went from being a planner to an unwilling participant. At some point, instead of merely playing the part of a hostage, Wells was double-crossed and became one. The fake bomb turned out to be a real one, and the scavenger hunt went from a clever piece of misdirection to a real-life race against the clock. Barnes pleaded guilty in September 2008 to the conspiracy and weapons charges involved in the collar bomb plot. He was sentenced to 45 years behind bars, but he agreed to testify against Dill Armstrong in the hope of getting his sentence reduced. So was it a murder covered up by a heist, or a heist to overlook some murders? No one will get the exact answers, and that's what makes this incident one of the most chilling money heists in the world of true crime. I woke up with a smile on my face. The sky seemed lovely. Everything seemed beautiful after a long time. While brushing my teeth, I stopped and gazed at my wardrobe, looking for the perfect outfit tonight. After a bad breakup and 5 emotionally draining months, I finally have a date. Among all my dresses, the black one caught my eye. I took it out and hung it near the mirror to give it a nice press later. After freshening up, I went to the kitchen to make breakfast. I live alone in this studio apartment. My parents live in New Jersey, and I moved out last year. The guy I dated was my neighbor's son, and a total ass. But Jason is not like him. He is different. It has only been a week since I have met Jason. I was shopping for groceries in Walmart when our trolleys stumbled upon each other. Our eyes met, and we couldn't help but smile. There was something in his stare that imprinted his face in my mind immediately. We exchanged some casual talks, and he even helped me carry my bags to the car. Then, he went on his way, and I drove home, wondering how strikingly handsome he is. 3 days after this incident, I was going to work when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Turning back, I saw it was Jason. He was driving a black truck and slowed down to talk to me. He said he too was going to work the same way and would like to drop me off. Without any hesitation, I hopped in, and now, here we are, meeting tonight for our first dinner date. Jason is very punctual, and unlike other guys, he never keeps me waiting. So, I finished my breakfast and started preparing myself for date night. I was thinking about what show to wear when my phone rang. Hi, Mom, what's up? Someone's in a good mood. What's the occasion? Nothing. Did you meet someone? What? No. Why would you? Kiara, I am your mom. I know you too well. Tell me about him. There's nothing to tell yet. We are going on our first date tonight. He is nice and well-behaved. That's good to hear. So, is it going to be just the date? Mom. Okay. No more interference in your private matter. You are a big girl now. Just be careful. And if you guys do it, then don't forget to use protection. Mom, please. I have to go now. I'll call you later. Have a nice night. Bye, little birdie. Even though I yelled at her for thinking too far ahead of time, the same thing was going in my mind as well. I took a deep breath and said to myself, looking in the mirror, stop worrying so much. Everything will be all right. The entire afternoon went by dressing myself and doing my makeup. When I finally got ready, wearing my beautiful black dress, paired with matching black heels, I blushed, seeing myself in the mirror. I sprayed perfume, and just when, a car horn honked under my apartment. I rushed to the window and saw Jason had arrived right on time. I rushed down, and he came out to open the door for me. You look like an angel. Thank you. I sat beside him and thought about getting a kiss before heading to the restaurant. But Jason smiled and started to drive. It has come to my notice that Jason is not a very touchy guy, and it actually is fine with me. Not everyone is comfortable with public displays of affection. We went to the Ocean Grill and sat on a corner table that allowed us perfect privacy. I am glad that we are spending time together. Me too. I talked about my childhood and high school boyfriends, and for the first time in life, I found a guy who actually listened. Jason never interrupted me or showed irritation as I rambled about myself. I loved how carefully he listened and how he even showed interest in my life, asking follow-up questions like, where do my parents live? How long have I been living on my own here? Do I know many people in this neighborhood? How often do I see my family? Etc. I also told him how I rarely talk to people at work and I have always been the quiet type. He smiled with his shining eyes and said, well, now you know me. For the first time, he kept his hand on mine and a warm feeling made my heart skip a beat. After dinner, we got into his car and Jason said, would you like to go to my place and hang out for a while? We can watch something on Netflix while having a couple of beers. I was bracing myself for this invitation, so I paused a while and said, okay. I may be a quiet girl, but I was smart enough to understand what this Netflix and chill idea stands for these days. Actually, there was no reason to say no because Jason is quite handsome and well off. If things go perfectly, then we have a long shot together. We left the highway and got onto a dusty road. On one side, I could see vast fields, and on the other, deep woods. I had no idea you lived on the outskirts. Yeah, my grandpa used to live here. Now, this is my place. After driving for 15 minutes more, we reached a wooden house. Even though it looked old and rusty from the outside, it appeared to be very cozy and warm from the inside. I was surprised to see how well decorated and clean the house was. Generally, you don't expect to see a bachelor's place in such good condition. But Jason was so particular in every little detail. A strong smell of room freshener was churning in the air. I understood Jason had planned to bring me to his place after dinner long back. He sat me down on the living room couch and turned on the big flat screen. The red logo of Netflix beamed the room with its usual sound, and a screen full of contents flashed in front of my eyes. Taking a look at the suggestions, I found out Jason prefers crime thrillers a lot. I was surfing through the movies when he came back holding 2 beers in his hand. What do you want to watch? Saying this, he handed me a beer and I replied, it seems you have a keen interest in crime thrillers. He laughed mysteriously and said, what's the fun if there's no thrill in life? I smiled and took a sip from the beer. He suggested watching the web series named You, about a guy whose stalking behavior makes him do the unthinkable. The web series started and Jason turned off the lights in the living room. My heartbeat got faster sitting in that empty house with him. After 5 minutes like this, he came close to me and said, would it be wrong if I kiss you, Kiara? I smiled and looked at his eyes, saying, "No." He kissed me on the lips, and I kissed him back. As we started to hit it off, Jason stopped and said, "I need to go to the washroom. Wait here. I'll be back soon." He went to the washroom, and I got excited, thinking, finally, the time is here. A minute went by. 10 minutes went by. I waited and waited, but Jason didn't come back. Thinking how weird it is, I got up and walked to the washroom. I was about to knock on the washroom door when I saw thick red liquid coming out from the gap under the door. I pushed the door open and saw Jason was lying on the floor, covered in blood with an injury on the back of his head. It wasn't hard to guess that somehow he slipped and hit his head. I ran towards him as he coughed blood while shaking. His eyes stared at me wildly, and then he started to choke in his own blood. "Oh my God! I will get something! Wait, Jason!" I ran to get a first aid kit, dialing the paramedics. I saw a room right next to the washroom. I opened the door and got in. I was about to press the call button when I looked around. What is this place? Chains were hanging from the ceiling with various torture devices tied to them. There were bamboo sticks, cuffs, and a big black table with sharp needles sticking on the surface. This room is only designed for torture. A camera was set up in the corner, probably to record a snuff film. I didn't call and went to check the camera. There was footage in its memory. One by one, I played those videos. Jason torturing girls in this room. So this is what his Netflix and chill date is. Bringing innocent girls into his house in the name of watching movies on Netflix, and then putting them through hell. Has he killed these girls too? My body got numb. I came to a psycho's house being his victim, but now he is lying injured in his own washroom. I thanked God for letting me live and slowly walked back into the washroom. Jason was still lying there and coughing blood. I stooped down to his face and said, "Did you torture and kill girls here?" Help me. Not before you answer that question. I'm sorry, but I swear I wasn't planning to do that with you. Suddenly, I don't know why I felt like believing him. Maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he actually fell in love with me. I helped him to get up and brought him to the living room couch. His head was still bleeding like crazy. I ripped off part of my cloth and put it on his head. Then I called paramedics and took him to a hospital. Jason received stitches and half of his body got paralyzed with his injury. A week later, I brought him back to this house, but this time, he sat in a wheelchair. I took him to that room of torture where I have to build a cage to keep him. He was not in his senses when I locked him inside that cage. One day, he might wake from this drowsy state of mind, making me realize it was all a lie, that I was too brought as a victim into this house. But if that happens, I am not letting him go behind other women. Taking my inspiration from the web series of Netflix, I will keep him locked up in that room forever. And I'm sure he will eventually fall in love with me. Last winter, I took a trip to the Alps in Switzerland. I have a huge knack for traveling, so whenever I happen to save time and money from work, I set out on the roads. Being an American, I had zero knowledge of German or French, which are officially spoken in Switzerland. Luckily, I managed to find a B&B that belonged to an Indian guy, hence I had no trouble communicating. The house I rented was a small wooden bungalow, perfect for a solo traveler. The owner told me his watchman lives nearby, so I won't be having any issues staying there. I was very excited about this trip, and going to Switzerland had always been my dream. After a long drive, when I finally made it to the location, my heart and mind started to dance in joy. The place was beautiful. There was a house in the distance on the foothills of the mountain. In front of the snow-covered wooden bungalow stood a lake that was frozen like an iceberg. There was another house bigger than mine that sat on the opposite side of me. So the frozen lake was like a division between these two houses. Hearing the sound of the cab, a short, slightly overweight man came out of the house with a big smile on his face. I understood he is the watchman. He introduced himself to me, and we exchanged greetings. He then picked up my luggage and went inside the house. I was about to follow him when I noticed the window of the house on the other side of the lake. It happened in a fraction of a second, but I surely felt someone move away from the window, drawing the curtains. So, I was being watched from the moment I stepped down from the cab. I uttered to myself, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Even though the bungalow seemed simple from the outside, it was like a charm from the inside. The living room had a fireplace with antique designs carved on its mantel. A revolving wooden staircase led to the bedrooms upstairs. The bed seemed like a pile of cotton, and I immediately wanted to jump in for a long-needed nap. A small balcony was also attached to the bedroom to enjoy the view outside with a hot cup of coffee in the winter morning. In a few words, I was in love with the place the moment I entered. The watchman was helpful. He started the fireplace and took me to the storage to show me the amount of food and groceries stocked for my stay. I always loved cooking my food, and that's why I prefer B&Bs to hotels. He made me some hot chocolate and handed me over the keys to leave for home. Out of curiosity, I asked him, "Who lives in the house opposite me?" To which he replied, "An old man in his late 50s. It took me by a little surprise that an old man lives alone in that big house. But then I thought, it's none of my business, so I better let it be. The watchman bid me good night, and I locked the door once he left. I took a hot shower that washed off my stress and then came down to the living room with my laptop and a pack of cigarettes. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on the big armchair near the fireplace to work on my article. I worked for an hour or so and then had dinner and went to bed early. I was really tired, so once my head hit the soft pillow, sleep fell into my eyes like a sweet dream. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up hearing noises outside. In my drowsy state of mind, it took me some time to figure out these noises. But after paying attention, it sounded like a little girl's laughter and a dog barking. I got up and walked to the window to look outside, but I didn't see anyone. I thought maybe it was a drunken dream, so I came back to bed and went to sleep again. The next morning, when I woke up, the valley looked even snowier. It seemed like there had been heavy snowfall last night. I made myself a brewing cup of coffee and came out to the balcony to enjoy it like it's supposed to. I must have taken 2 or 3 sips when I saw 2 tiny figures approaching behind a snow-covered pine tree. Their cackles could be heard, even from quite a distance. A little girl, dressed in winter clothes, came running near the frozen lake with her dog. The dog was so fluffy that it almost tumbled down the snow trying to make its way. The little girl laughed like a ray of sunshine. Watching her dog is so funny. A smile came to my face as well as witnessing these 2 playing in the snow. The dog was chasing the girl, barking loudly as she was dodging him, laughing like a pretty Barbie doll. I was thinking to join them when my eyes went to the window of the neighboring house, and I saw a weird-looking old man sitting on his balcony with binoculars and staring at that kid. I mean, she was completely visible with naked eyes, so I didn't see any reason why this old man would be using binoculars like a creep. It could have been an issue of his eyesight, but the look on his face and the anxiety in his movement disturbed me a bit. He suddenly looked at me and immediately rushed inside in a hurry as I caught him red-handed in a crime. His behavior gave me the creeps, so I decided to watch over this kid and her dog until her parents come for her. I yelled from my balcony, "Hey, what's your name, kiddo?" But she was so busy playing that she didn't look at me once. I came downstairs thinking to join them, but as soon as I came out, they were gone. I felt bad disrupting them in the middle of their fun time and came back inside. But I couldn't stop thinking about this freaky old man next door. For the next few days, I watched the girl and her dog come here and play on the frozen lake. I never saw any adult with them, and this old man always eyed them with his binoculars. A week went by, and I was on the verge to speak up against the creepy behavior of the neighbor next door when something terrible happened to change my life forever. It was the coldest winter night, and heavy snowfall was going outside. I was feeling a bit bored. Also, I didn't see that cute girl and her dog the entire day. I thought maybe her parents didn't let her out of the house today. Honestly, it did worry me a bit whenever they played on that lake. I mean, the ice surfaces are not that thick on every spot. This is also a firm reason why I kept an eye on them whenever they came to play. I couldn't feel more angry thinking about how irresponsible her parents are. Anyways, I was heavily drunk that night and dozed off on the living room couch. Around 2:30 in the morning, I heard the little girl's laughter and the barking of the dog. I got up thinking, what the hell are they doing here so late? As I peeked outside the window, I saw the girl skating on the frozen lake amidst the heavy snowfall and her dog playfully jumping around her. I screamed, opening the window. "You shouldn't be out here at this time. Did your parents know that you guys left the house in such weather?" But as usual, she didn't look at me or pay any attention to what I said. Suddenly, my eyes went to the house on the other side of the lake, and I saw that old man coming out with a flashlight in his hand, walking to the girl at full speed. Oh my God, he is trying to abduct her, taking advantage of this stormy night. I couldn't stop myself anymore and came out barefooted, that too, in my pajamas, and started to run towards him. No sooner did I reach the lake, the little girl jumped one last time on the icy surface, and a loud cracking sound took place, followed by a splash and a faded scream. The little dog barked too, and soon, the dog and the girl both drowned in the icy cold water of the lake. The old man screamed in a sobbing tone. "Stop! Stop coming back and reminding me of my mistake, Kathy! Stop doing this to your papa!" And he crouched on the ground, covering his face, and started to cry. I shouted, saying, "We need to help them! Holy shit, they are drowning!" I was about to jump in the freezing water when the old man screamed back, "No, you can't save them." "What do you mean I can't?" "They have been dead for the last 25 years. I was about to scream at him for pulling this absurd prank when a sound of giggle came to my ears. I looked at the lake again, and I saw that little girl and her dog playing on it just like before. Their bodies seemed transparent, and I could see through them. The girl then picked up her dog, and for the first time, she looked into my eyes. There were no eyeballs in them, except dark hollows. It was the same with her little dog as well. She then giggled for one last time and vanished into the air. I don't remember what happened next because I had probably fainted on the spot. When I woke up in the morning, I felt pain piercing my entire body and the old man sitting right next to my bed with the watchman. Who was she? What happened last night?" The old man wiped his tears and said, "That was my daughter, Catherine. I used to call her Kathy. She was 5 years old then. Every winter she used to come out of the house and play in the snow with her little dog, Casper. I remember how she laughed and joy seeing the white snow everywhere. One night, my wife and I were asleep in our room. I got drunk and forgot to lock the main door that night. Kathy must have woken up, seeing the snowfall, and secretly went out to play, taking her dog with her. They were playing on the lake when the ice cracked, and they fell into the icy cold water. I came running hearing their scream, and immediately dove in looking for them. But her little body got lost in that evil lake. My wife went mad after her death and committed suicide after not being able to take this pain. But Kathy comes back often. Whenever a heavy snowfall takes place, she comes back to remind me of how it was my mistake, how it was my irresponsible deed that led to her death." I didn't know what to say after hearing this story, and I just sat there with a pale face. Is it even possible? Can people come back again and again? Is there still life even after death? Down came the rain and washed the spider out. For Rhonda Goulet, the meaning of Christmas has forever changed 27 years ago. Her 18-year-old sister, Danita, was one of 6 people shot and killed over 3 days around Christmas in 1992. 4 young people embarked on a shooting rampage that left 6 people dead, 2 others injured, and impacted scores of others, friends, relatives, and members of the public in countless ways. Starting as petty robberies that netted a plaid coat, a pair of sneakers, and $44, the crime escalated to something else: joy killings. According to the detectives of this case, they were just killing people randomly for nothing. Literally nothing. There was not even a motive in these cases. It was just for fun. The 4 people convicted of the killings were part of a group that spent most days bumming money on courthouse stairs until they graduated to something much worse. There was the Christmas tree lighting on Courthouse Square across the street. As people shopped and celebrated, they would have never imagined what was about to happen. A band of teenagers were looking for trouble. Laura Taylor, Marvelous Keene, Heather Matthews, and DeMarcus Smith called themselves the Downtown Posse. They were estranged from their families and looking for trouble. "Let's get some drama in our lives," Taylor, a 16-year-old runaway, said to the group. On Christmas Eve, they began the worst crime spree in Dayton history. The first victim was Joseph Wilkerson. The girls lured their way into his Prescott Avenue home, promising sex, and the 34-year-old General Motors worker was shot and killed. The posse then partied in Wilkerson's house over the next 3 days. They ate his food and drove his cars while he lay dead in a bedroom. That same night, they shot Danita Goulet, 18, who was using a payphone outside a neighborhood market in West Dayton. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. Police said Goulet was robbed of her gym shoes, jacket, and book bag. "All she said was, 'Don't shoot me,' and they shot her anyway," said Rhonda Goulet, the victim's sister. "She gave them everything she had. I just wish they would have spared my sister." On Christmas Day, the body of 19-year-old Richard Maddox was discovered in a car. He had been shot in the head. Detectives later found out that Maddox was the former boyfriend of Laura Taylor. Jeffrey Wright was also shot that day outside a home on Yuma Place. Despite 4 bullets, he survived. The posse went into the Shortstop Minimart on December 26 and shot Sarah Abraham, who was working in a family business that holiday weekend. The 38-year-old mother died 5 days later in the hospital. A store customer who was shot, Jones Pettis, survived. At first, Dayton homicide detectives did not know that these crimes were all connected. "Really, the first thing that made the connection for us was the ammunition," said retired Dayton homicide detective Doyle Burke. "Then you start to worry and you figure out that we've got a person or persons that are probably not going to stop." Burke said they had no idea who they were looking for. The fact that it was truly stranger on stranger crime, which is the most difficult homicide to solve, there was not even a motive, Burke said. Later, on December 26th, former Dayton Police Sergeant John Huber spotted a stolen car on Kumler Avenue. At the time, he did not know that he was stopping Dayton's spree killers. They all cooperated and put their hands up. I was later to find out from the detectives that Laura Taylor told Marvelous Keene to shoot me, and he wouldn't, said Huber. After so much violence, the gang's capture was fairly uneventful. Smith ran into a nearby house, but was quickly captured, while the other 3, Keene, Matthews, and Taylor, were taken into custody without incident. After the 4 members of the posse were behind bars, Taylor got a visit from a local minister who was concerned that she was only 16 and accused of such terrible crimes. During their visit, Taylor told him about 2 more victims. Police found the bodies of Wendy Cottrell, 16, and Marvin Washington, 19, in a city-owned gravel pit on Ridgely Avenue. Taylor said they were shot because the group thought that they would snitch to the police. Taylor and Matthews are serving life sentences for murder at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, while Smith is serving a life murder sentence at the Mansfield Correctional Institution. On July 21st, 2009, Keene, who was convicted in 5 of the killings, was executed by lethal injection at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville. He had no last words. Keene was not a template killer. He had never been arrested and was a good student, until his older brother was killed while committing a robbery in 1991. That had a profound effect on him, according to a court report. He became depressed, virtually gave up on his educational efforts for a time, and was morose and introspective. Keene moved to California to live with his father, but returned to Dayton in August 1992 after conflicts over money. He walked away from his mother's Dayton home early that December and landed in a flophouse on Yuma Place, across the Great Miami River from downtown Dayton. There, he and his pals connived how to make a quick buck for Christmas. "I wanted to be like them. I wanted to do what they were doing," Matthews said. Detective Burke said that once the killing started, he believes they were all willing participants. "They enjoyed it. They lived it. It made them somebody, Burke said. Rhonda Goulet admits that even after 25 years, the holidays are very difficult. I grieve for my family, but I continue to grieve for the other victims' families and also the people who are incarcerated, said Goulet. Anybody's life can either go to the left or the right, so I do. I think about them very often. Goulet said the murder of her sister had a huge impact on her life. The crime led to the breakup of her engagement, the loss of a child, and her mother. 6 years later, my mother passed away prematurely, said Goulet. My mother passed away at 51 years old, and she passed away because of grief. My mother died of a broken heart. Goulet is now an advocate for victims' rights and is working on her master's degree. She said she gets through the holidays by serving her church and feeding the homeless. The group tried to rob another person before targeting Danita Goulet, an 18-year-old high school senior and mother, in a phone booth. Some would call it a case of thrill killing. Others would point to juvenile delinquency, dysfunctional family issues, or just plain bad kids. The identified ringleader would not fit none of these stereotypes and yet decided to go on a murder spree that would shock his community. I looked at the clock while checking the brisket in the oven. It's 7:30 p.m. and Ruth should have been home by now. Ruth is my elder sister, who is the only family I have now. We were young when our parents died in a plane crash. Even though we come from a Jewish family, due to many lifestyle changes, we have failed to follow all our norms and traditions. But on the last day of Hanukkah, we cooked brisket for dinner and lit up candles to pay our respect in our small way. Ruth and I have made this pact that every year, no matter where we are, we will see each other on Hanukkah and celebrate it to spread a little joy in our life. I came yesterday to stay with her. Her cozy 2-story house gave me a comforting vibe that I haven't gotten in a long time. We are going on a small trip tomorrow, and I am hoping to have a good time there. If I get lucky, I might meet some sensible guy. Thinking this and also feeling bored, I went to apply a face mask to rejuvenate my skin. I called Ruth, and as she picked up, I said, "Hey, when will you be home?" "Sorry, Stacy, I'm trying, ASAP. You know how busy the office gets before the weekend. Just chill on your own. I will be home soon." "Cool. Don't forget the wine." "I won't. Gotta go. Bye." She hung up, and I applied the mask on my face and played some music to relax a bit. The brisket will take half an hour more to cook, so I had a lot of time on my hand. I was enjoying the mask and a little self-care. 15 minutes later, I heard the main door open and Ruth walk in. Due to the mask, I couldn't open my eyes, so I said in a cheerful voice, "You're home early." She replied, "Mm-hmm." "What happened? Did the cat get your tongue?" "Nothing." "You sound tired. Pour yourself a glass of wine. The brisket will take time." I heard Ruth walking towards the kitchen. While she made herself comfortable, I went on chatting like I always do. I talked about how Grandma used to make us our special dinner on Hanukkah, and we both finished our meal like good girls just to get the chocolates at the end of the meal. Childhood was a fun time. I was ranting like a chatterbox, but quite odd about my sister. She was being too quiet, and that was against her nature. I mean, she talked more than me. I didn't say anything for a while, thinking she is really tired. Her constant movement went around the house, and all of a sudden, my phone rang. Without taking the mask off, I said, "Alexa, answer the call." My device was already linked to it, so the call buzzed, and I heard a familiar voice on the other side. "Panina, sorry for running late. I just got off from work. I'm picking up the wine and will be home before you can say brisket. Love you, sis." I could feel my body freezing on that couch as my sister Ruth hung up on me. If she isn't home yet, then who have I been talking to for the last several minutes? A creepy chuckle rang right next to my ear, and I took the mask off in one go. A dirty, pale face was staring down at me. The eyes in that face were so disturbingly green that for a moment, it felt like a creature from another world. Not being able to move in fear, I just stared back like a statue. A horrifying-looking, strange woman was staring at me, standing in my own house whom I thought to be my sister. We stayed like that for a minute, which felt like a lifetime to me. Then she said in her rusty voice, "How about I slit your throat before your sister comes home and hide your body in the closet? Then I will wait for her and do the same after she enters from that entrance." What? What do you want? I just told you what I want. I slowly got up and slid back on the couch while trembling in fear. The woman didn't move, didn't do anything, just smiled big. I could see in her eyes how much she was enjoying my fear. I said in a fumbled voice, Look, if you want money, there's my purse. Take all and just leave." "You look really scared, but I haven't done anything yet. Panina, isn't that what your sister called you on the phone? If I scream right now, the neighbors will hear you and they will call the cops on you. So, it'll be better. But will you scream even after seeing this?" The woman took out a big sharp knife, which she took from my kitchen. I got up while shaking and said, "Why are you doing this? I just need a shelter for the night. Panina, it was tough to break from prison after committing 3 murders, you know? And now that I have a chance to a free life, I can't risk it because of you and your sister. Come on, lay down here like you were lying before and let me slit your throat in the most painless way possible. In the beginning, you will feel a sharp pain and pressure of blood rushing out of your veins, but then it will all be over. I promise your sister won't feel a thing either." My head throbbed as I realized this woman is an escaped convict who entered our house finding the door unlocked. Suddenly, the oven alarm buzzed as the brisket was ready and the woman got distracted a little. Using that opportunity, I ran towards the kitchen to grab a weapon to defend myself. But before I could reach the top shelf, she grabbed my hair with full strength and bashed my head on the kitchen desk right beside the oven. I screamed in pain, hitting the hard surface, and fell on the floor. The woman then lunged at me with the knife, but I moved over and she stabbed the knife on the wooden floor. The knife cut through the floor and got stuck. As she tried to pull it out, I opened the oven door and grabbed the warm tray of brisket. My palms burnt like crazy, but I ignored the pain as I fought for my survival. I dropped the heavy metal tray right on her face, and she screamed in pain. Half of her face got burnt with the hot surface of the tray. Without giving her a second chance to get up, I grabbed her hair and stuck her head right inside the hot oven and started to slam the oven lid on her. Once, twice, thrice, and that's it. Her shivering body became quiet when I hit her for the last time. Her brain matter and chunks of skin fell into the oven, and she stopped moving forever. I fell on the floor, holding my bleeding head just when Ruth entered, opening the main door. She screamed, seeing the bloody scene, and I fainted on the floor. The next morning when I woke up in my room, I was surrounded by cops and a doctor. The cops told me how this woman escaped the local prison and barged into our house. I still thank God for giving me that presence of mind and strength to fight this crime. Only one of us could have survived that night, and luckily, it was me. If she managed to kill me, my sister would have been dead too. Like she said, I don't think I will ever be able to celebrate Hanukkah the same way again. Those disturbing green eyes have scarred me for life. Tamala Horsford arrived at the party around 8:30 p.m. The 40-year-old black mother had made dinner for her 5 sons and husband, Leander, before heading out to celebrate the birthday of her friend, Jean Myers. Myers had invited a group of moms, most who'd met through the local youth football league, to spend the night, not wanting anyone to drink and drive. Horsford arrived with a bottle of tequila and a small overnight bag, and changed into white onesie pajamas covered in paw prints shortly after she got there. The party, held the evening of November 3rd, 2018, was originally meant to be all women. But Myers' boyfriend, Jose Barrera, and Tom Smith, the husband of another attendee, ended up sticking around. In the end, the group who advocates for Horsford, would later dub the Forsyth 12, included 9 women, 2 men, and 1 husband, who, according to police interviews, only dropped off and picked up his wife. Out of these 12, 8 were planning to spend the night, as was Tamala. While the women drank, socialized, and watched the LSU-Alabama game upstairs, Barrera and Smith watched football in Myers' finished basement. During this time, Horsford, the only habitual smoker at the party, regularly stepped out to the balcony for cigarettes. She also smoked pot that evening, but Myers asked her to stop. According to Myers' own statement, she had teased Horsford during the conversation, calling her the female Bob Marley, and reminding her that Barrera worked as a pretrial officer and did not approve. Eventually, the men joined the party, and the group played Cards Against Humanity. Photographs and videos captured during the game show Horsford smiling happily. She had been drinking tequila, but according to photos, videos, and witness accounts, Horsford didn't appear particularly drunk that evening. Guests who weren't spending the night began to leave around 11:30 p.m., while those who stayed trickled off to bed over the next couple of hours. According to police interviews, Horsford remained awake after Myers and Barrera headed to bed around 1:30 a.m. The last person to see Horsford was Bridget Fuller, who was picked up by her husband at 1:47. In her statement, Fuller says that Horsford was eating a bowl of gumbo and had said she planned to smoke a cigarette and head to bed. Over the next 10 minutes, the home security system registered the back door opening, closing, and then opening again for the last time at 1:57 a.m. Around 8:45 the next morning, Madeline Lombardi, Myers' aunt who lived at the house, headed into the kitchen to make her morning cup of coffee. In her interview with police, Lombardi described seeing something chilling through the window in the backyard. The white dog print onesie. It was Horsford, face down in the grass, not moving. After saying a prayer, Lombardi headed upstairs to find Myers, telling her something appeared to be wrong with her. Forsyth County 911 got the call just before 9 a.m. Horsford was pronounced dead at the scene, and her body sent for autopsy. But even before the report came back, the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office began to work the theory that Horsford's death had been an accident, a fall from the second-story outdoor deck. The case remained open for almost 4 months until the FSCO made their official determination on February 20th, 2019, 2 weeks after the state of Georgia medical examiner provided their final report. The FSCO pointed to the toxicology report, which tested positive for THC and clocked her blood alcohol content at .238, just shy of 3 times the legal limit to drive. With a BAC typically associated with blackouts, loss of coordination, and even vomiting, the FSCO determined that marijuana and alcohol use likely contributed to the fall. They also noted the door alarm log, as well as an unlit cigarette and lighter Barrera said she found on the upper deck. Together, the investigators found that this evidence suggested Horsford went out for a cigarette sometime around 1:57 a.m. and accidentally fell to her death. When they closed the case, the department released the incident report and death investigation to the public. But these documents didn't provide the answers Horsford's family and friends were looking for. In fact, they only caused more confusion. How did a woman with that high of a BAC appear in control of her facilities, according to interviews as well as video taken that night, yet managed to fall over a nearly 4-foot railing and into the backyard? How could a house full of people, some asleep for less than half an hour, not hear Horsford fall to her death right outside their windows? Could a 15 to 20-foot fall cause not only death, but a dislocated wrist, broken neck, and a laceration to her heart muscle? Why wasn't the scene preserved, evidence tested, or potential witnesses interviewed immediately? What happened when the back door opened just before 2 a.m.? And why is it left open until the next morning? And would the investigation have gone differently if Horsford wasn't the only black person at the party? Horsford was born in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 1978, where she lived until her family moved to the Bronx in 1989. She'd met her husband in Florida, who had a daughter from a previous relationship, and they went on to have 5 sons together. When Horsford died, her youngest son was only 4 years old. By all accounts, Horsford was the life of the party. She liked to laugh, to dance, to have fun. When the Horsfords moved to Georgia 5.5 years earlier for Leander's work, it was this warmth that had attracted Myers and others to the charismatic mother. But the questions surrounding Horsford's case goes beyond the optics of a black woman dying at a party with a group of white people. According to the autopsy from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, Horsford showed blunt force trauma to her head, neck, torso, and extremities, including abrasions of the face, 4 types of hemorrhages in the skull and brain, dislocation of the right wrist, and cuts on her arms and legs. Additionally, she suffered a broken neck and a laceration of the right ventricle of the heart. According to the incident report, written by lead investigator Mike Christian, Horsford's body position was also examined at the scene. Most notable, when Tamala was turned over, was the fact she had come to rest face down. Christian writes, her head had not been canted to one side or the other. Horsford's legs were found extended behind her, with both feet pointing to the right, and her right arm close to her body. Her left arm was found extended and bent at the elbow. Friends, family, and advocates have doubted whether Horsford's injuries and resting position could be the result of a fall from the balcony. Some have questioned whether the injuries to her hands and arms could be defensive wounds, which would suggest perhaps an altercation before either going over the balcony or being positioned in the backyard. In fact, the incident report shows that Christian's initial theory was that Horsford had experienced a fall not from the deck, but from the ground. Due to landscaping edging that matched scrapes on Horsford's shins, Christian only brought the balcony fall theory to Dr. Andrew Koopmeiners, Associate Medical Examiner with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, after the medical examiner explained that the injuries suffered could not have been caused by a ground-level fall. In his final report, Koopmeiners concluded that appeared as though she may have fallen from the deck, ultimately ruling that her injuries were consistent with those received in a roughly second-story fall. Potential evidence may also have been compromised or missed. The scene was never secured, and at least one witness, pretrial officer Barrera, told investigators he touched the body, saying he moved Horsford's leg while trying to figure out if she was still alive. Barrera also said in his interview he found and moved the unlit cigarette and lighter on the deck before he saw the body. But because police believed the death to be an accident, no evidence was ever fingerprinted. And though Barrera states on the original 911 call that security cameras were installed and pointed at the backyard, the batteries were found to be dead and the cameras not recording. During the autopsy, neither a sexual assault kit nor fingernail clippings were collected. In a call with Rolling Stone, GBI Public Affairs Director Nellie Miles explained that these steps are not routine and weren't taken in this case because there was no indication of foul play. The GBI's Division of Forensic Science also declined to test the contents of the bottle of tequila that Horsford had brought that evening. Miles explained that it's standard policy not to test for illicit substances when the possible suspect is deceased, as there would be nobody to hold accountable if they were to find drugs present. The case still remains a mystery, but like Horsford's family, we too want justice for her and hope soon the truth will come out on this matter. I don't know how many of you will believe this story, but till today when I think about it, I feel a cold shiver rushing down my spine. I was about 10 or 11 years old back then. The winter holidays were about to begin, and I was getting excited about the yearly family trip that I always took with my parents. But unfortunately, my dad got an urgent order from his company. He had to go to Chicago for some serious business meeting. I got very upset as our winter tour got postponed. Seeing me make an owl face, my mom came up with the idea of visiting my granny and uncle living in a small town in Oregon. My uncle was a fun-loving bachelor who never believed in the idea of marriage. No matter how many people in our neighborhood mocked him for staying with his old mother in his 40s, he never seemed too bothered by them. He always answered back as he is happy to take ahead the family business of fish selling while taking care of his old mother. I spend hours with them doing all kinds of adventures whenever I visited Granny, so going to their place sounded more lucrative to me than staying home and doing nothing the entire winter holiday. My mom and I boarded onto the flight right after the day Dad left for Chicago. When we arrived there, I got extremely happy to see my granny's beautiful house. I got out of the car, and my uncle opened the door shouting, "Here comes Bud!" Happy, Buzzo came running towards me while barking loudly in joy. Buzzo is a golden retriever who has been living with my uncle for the last 3 years now. In a few words, he is my uncle's best friend. Granny came out and we all greeted each other and went inside the house. Being the spoiled kid already, my granny and uncle started to pamper me even more. The dining table got filled with all my favorite dishes and also my most favorite of them all, apple pie. Uncle served me a huge piece of pie and said, "Eat as much as you want, bud. I'm so happy to see you." I smiled and hugged him, saying, "I miss you all too." After dinner, we played Uno, laughed and joked about my mom's and uncle's childhood incidents. Then she tucked me in bed, and that night, I got 3 goodnight kisses. I was happy thinking my winter holiday is going to be even more fun this year. But things didn't go as per my expectations. My uncle used to leave for work early in the morning. Naturally, he was the one who always woke up first. One winter morning, a heavy storm took place. My granny requested my uncle, "Don't go to work today. It's snowing heavily outside." But my uncle was a headstrong person when it came to his work. He ignored her as usual and left for work in his small truck. The storm grew wilder and heavier after he left, and my granny started to become worried sick about him. She kept on calling him, but my uncle didn't pick up. When after 6 hours he didn't come back, we all got worried and decided to call the cops to go and look for him. The cops searched the entire town looking for him, and around 5 a.m. the next morning, they found my uncle's upside-down pickup truck crashed under a tree. He was found in the driver's seat dead. There was a big bruise on his forehead with clotted blood underneath. All my memories of him started to flash in front of my eyes, and I couldn't hold myself anymore. As a matter of fact, that in the last hours of his life, he didn't get to see his loved ones was way worse than all of our accumulated suffering. A holiday turned into an abyss of sorrow after this shocking incident. The next day, we arranged his funeral, and my dad arrived to support all of us. One by one, the town people walked up to his open casket and put flowers on the stand near him. My grandma was the last one to go, as she could barely face this harsh truth. My mom and I held her hand, and we walked to his lying pale, dead body. As my grandma stretched out her hand to touch his cheek for one last time, something terribly crazy took place. Scaring the hell out of all of us, my uncle sat up in his coffin and started to stare at everyone's face who came for his funeral. My mom fainted screaming, and my grandma yelled in joy. "Oh, my son, you came back. You're alive. God heard my prayer. God gave me my son back." This was truly a miracle to all of us, and accepted that sometimes this does happen. We thought maybe his heart stopped somehow and then started again. Labeling this under fate and luck, we happily brought him back home. But after coming home from this absurd situation, my uncle changed into a different person. He kept to himself and barely talked to anyone. He would just sit in his room, turning off the lights, and stare outside the window for hours. Not just that, Buzzo's behavior towards him changed too. The dog who was ready to die for his master suddenly feared to go near him, even for a second. Whenever Uncle came near him, Buzzo would bark and growl like he was some kind of stranger to him. What surprised me even more was that my uncle also started disliking Buzzo and often avoided him. The bruise on his forehead also stayed the same, like a birthmark. One evening, I was sitting in the living room and watching TV. Mom and Dad went out, and Grandma was asleep in her room. My uncle came to me and said, "Hey, can you make me a cup of coffee? It's on an important level. Why don't you make it?" No. I am scared to go light up the stove." "What? Why?" I can't go near fire. I'm scared of fire." For the first time, I heard the word scared from my uncle, who never feared anything in this world. That night, I woke up around 1:30 a.m. to go to the bathroom. The bathroom is downstairs at the end of the corridor, located at the back side of the house. I was doing my business when I heard a low moaning sound that dogs make when they get scared. Turning around, I saw Buzzo standing near the bathroom door and staring at me with wide, fearful eyes. "What? What is it, boy?" He moaned once again in a very low voice. I could feel he was trying to tell me something, so I started following him. Buzzo took me to my uncle's room and then ran away. I have never seen him behave this way, so I got a bit startled. The door of my uncle's room was slightly open. A dim yellow light was coming from that gap, and I could hear a weird sound. There's no way I can describe it till today. But as I peeked in to take a look inside my uncle's bedroom, the blood in my veins turned cold. My uncle was standing near the window. He is an average height guy, but that night, he seemed very tall. He was standing there with a small cutter knife in his hand. What he did next still gives me nightmares. He made a small cut on his own wrist and started to suck his own blood. His eyes widened in excitement as his tongue felt the taste of blood. At that moment, I realized whoever came back that day of the funeral is not my uncle anymore. I wanted to scream, but I also wanted others to see exactly what I was seeing. I tiptoed to my parents' room and woke them up. I then brought them downstairs and showed them the same monstrosity that I witnessed a few moments back. My uncle's face was all red with blood, and his eyeballs were red too. I couldn't take this sight anymore and screamed when my uncle looked back at us and let out a demonic growl. He then shattered his glass window and escaped like a creature from a different dimension. That was the last time I saw my uncle. I used to work as a live-in butler at a manor in the countryside for a very old and very wealthy man. His name was Mr. Benson, and while he was a little distant and crotchety, as old rich men tended to be, he always treated his staff with respect, and I felt like I was valued working under him. I'm sure that the other household servants, from the maids to his personal chef, also felt the same way. Most of us have been serving him for a decade or more. Even if he was just our employer, you can't work for someone for that long without getting a little attached. We all knew that Mr. Benson didn't have much longer to live at his age, but we were determined to make his final years as comfortable as possible, as thanks for keeping us employed for so long. Each Christmas, Mr. Benson would leave the manor to spend time with his family in the city. 9 times out of 10, he would return to his rural manor on Boxing Day the following morning, looking pissed off. If I had to guess, it was probably because his family kept insisting that he put himself in a retirement home, though I never pried him on it. I was still just his butler after all. On Boxing Day, the staff were pleasantly surprised when he came back from his Christmas trip with gifts for all of us. Boxing Day in the UK was originally a holiday where masters would give their servants the day off alongside a boxed gift. While the practice has died down since not everyone had servants, Mr. Benson still gave us Boxing Day off, as per tradition. However, his gifts were usually envelopes of cash rather than neatly wrapped presents he gave us that day. At his insistence, we all unwrapped the presents in front of him. Some of the maids let out a stifled squeak when they realized what it was. Each servant of the manor got their very own golden box of luxury chocolates, myself included. Everyone thanked the old man for his thoughtful gift. Apparently, it's true that everybody likes chocolate. I thanked Mr. Benson as well, though I knew I would never get to taste the chocolate he gave me. I was deathly allergic to the stuff, but I wasn't about to tell him that and ruin the gesture. Instead, I decided to use my day off to go do some Christmas charity of my own with this gift. I drove to the nearby city and walked into the nearest homeless shelter. They were holding a food drive where people were donating things like canned meat and cereal, stuff that lasts for a long time and keeps you fed even if they don't taste too great. I added the box of chocolates I got to that pile, thinking that I could help brighten someone's day. The volunteer worker I handed the box of chocolates to looked surprised when I handed it to her and asked if I was sure about giving something like that away. I told her that it was fine since it was a gift, and since I'm allergic to chocolate anyways, it's better given to someone who can actually enjoy it. Once that was done, I spent the rest of my free day enjoying the festivities in the city before I had to return to the manor in the countryside. I went shopping with the money I'd saved up over the year. I watched some cheesy but charming Christmas movies in the theater, treated myself to dinner at a trendy restaurant, and may have taken advantage of some sales to snag a couple of bottles of expensive whiskey. All in all, I had a good time. Once I'd exhausted all of my Christmas cheer, I drove back to the manor with a bag of Christmas goodies in the trunk. The first thing I saw when I walked through the manor door was one of the maids lying still on the floor. I recognized her as Clara, one of Mr. Benson's more recent hires. At first, I assumed that she must have passed out drunk after having one glass of Christmas brandy too many. I've been in her shoes before on my days off at the manor, though I at least had the decency to do so in the privacy of my own bedroom. Being the head butler of the manor, I was already thinking of how to reprimand her for allowing such a shameful display as I tried to gently shake her awake. "Clara, wake up this instant. You're a servant, not a dog that can sleep on the floor." When she didn't wake up, I got worried. I put my hand on her forehead and recoiled in surprise when I found that it was ice cold to the touch. My growing concern turned to outright horror when I placed 2 fingers to her neck and realized that she had no pulse. "Everyone, come quick! Something's happened to Clara!" I shouted for everyone in the manor to hear, but no one came. A pit formed in my stomach. Fearing the worst, I went deeper into the manor and came across the same scene in every room. The servants of the house, my friends and colleagues whom I'd lived with, worked with for years, all lay lifeless in each room. I called the police on my phone, and they arrived within the hour. As I was giving one of them my statement, I overheard one of the officers investigating the scene behind me talking about it. "No wounds or signs of struggle. Looks like another case of poisoning. Must have been the same guy who poisoned that homeless shelter earlier today. But why would they do something like this?" Minutes later, another officer came out of the master bedroom where Mr. Benson usually slept, holding a note signed by Mr. Benson himself. He told his colleagues that it looked like a suicide note and read it out loud for them to hear. "To whom it may concern, today will be my last day on this mortal coil. I know that old age will take me soon, but I am determined to die on my own terms rather than wait for the Reaper to claim me. However, the thought of dying alone weighs heavy on me. These past few years have only been made bearable by the aid of my cherished servants, whom I can't imagine myself without, even in the afterlife. I have poisoned them with my gift of chocolates. By the time anyone reads this, they will be dead, and I will have joined them. They did not suffer, for I have been told that the poison was painless. To the loved ones they left behind, please do not fret. I will love them in my next life as much as I did in this one." On December 24th, 2008, the Ortega family invited all 5 of their adult children and their families to their home in Covina, California. The area was a quiet, low-crime community about 22 miles east of Los Angeles. The Ortegas, Joseph and Alice, loved Christmas among all the festivals. It was their favorite time of year as the entire family reunited and visited them, including their 2 oldest sons, James and Charles, and their daughters, Leticia, Alicia, and Sylvia. That Christmas Eve, the family played a boisterous game of poker, and the party was in full swing. But in the middle of their holiday celebration, suddenly, the doorbell rang. What unfolded next was incredibly gruesome. Hearing the doorbell, 8-year-old Katrina, granddaughter of the Ortegas, screamed in joy. "That must be Santa!" A house filled with approximately 20 to 25 guests had no idea what was waiting for them on the other side of the door. As soon as the door opened, Katrina saw a man dressed like Santa standing with a big box gift wrapped in his hand. She ran to greet him like every innocent kid. But Santa took out a handgun from that box and shot her in the face. As soon as her bloody body fell to the ground, the loud gunshot created immediate panic among the guests and the family members. Everyone started to run for their lives as soon as they realized there's a psycho shooter at the Christmas party. The crazy shooter dressed as Santa Claus then started to pointedly execute the fleeing partygoers using the other guns that he carried inside that gift box. After the shootings, the Psycho Santa unwrapped the package containing the compressor and used it to spray gasoline to set the home on fire. 9 people died from either gunfire or flames, and the 3 others were wounded. Katrina was shot in the face with severe but non-life-threatening injuries. A 16-year-old girl shot and wounded in the back. and a 20-year-old woman who suffered a broken ankle jumped out of the second-floor window. There was one survivor who called the authorities during the attack after escaping to a neighbor's house. The caller dialed 911 and screamed in terror, "Come immediately! Someone's burning down their house!" The fire department was dispatched to the Ortega house, but the calls kept coming in. Some even reported that they heard shooting coming from the house, and when police arrived at the scene, it was total chaos. One lieutenant said, "When I arrived, to describe it as apocalyptic would be accurate." The only Ortega family members police could locate was Leticia, who had managed to escape the fire with her husband and 8-year-old daughter, Katrina, and made it to a neighbor's house. When the police were told what happened, they were shocked. Someone dressed as Santa had unexpectedly arrived at the Ortega home and began shooting. In the middle of investigating the chaotic scene, police also received a tip from a neighbor. She and her husband had seen a car leaving their cul-de-sac at around 11:45 p.m. After putting out an APB on the car, police started shifting through the Ortega's scorched home. They found bodies burned beyond recognition, which were later identified as the missing Ortega family members. A total of 9 people were killed the night of Christmas Eve, and the only question remained was, who is the psycho shooter dressed as Santa Claus? While the police were busy investigating this brutal mass murder, a neighbor informed that he had seen a guy dressed in Santa fleeing the crime scene once the house was set on fire. Before the cops could follow this lead to find the killer Santa, they received another 911 call from Silmar, which is 30 miles away from the crime scene, about suicide by gunshot. The handgun used by this man to shoot himself was later discovered to be the same gun with which the Ortega family was murdered. And this man's name was Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, who killed himself at his brother's residence in Silmar when no one was home on the same night the shootings took place. Looking into Bruce's past, investigators discovered he was the ex-husband of Sylvia, one of the daughters of Mr. and Mrs. Ortega. Sylvia filed for divorce from Bruce, which was finalized on December 18, 2008, just a few days before the holiday. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, dressed in a Santa Claus suit, knocked on the door of his former in-laws' house, occupied by about 25 people, with a gift-wrapped package containing a rolling air compressor converted to deliver gasoline from it and at least 4 9mm semi-automatic handguns. After shooting and setting the house on fire, Pardo put on his street clothes and drove away in a rental car to his brother's house in Silmar. Police performed autopsies on the bodies from the Ortega house. They found all the victims had been shot at least once with a 9mm handgun. On Christmas Day, police also interviewed Leticia, who said that, despite the Santa Claus costume, beard, and hat, she could identify the shooter. Her sister's ex-husband, Bruce Pardo. Investigators then went back to Silmar, where Bruce was found dead, and searched his car, which ended up being the same car the Ortega's neighbors had described seeing on their street after the murders. Inside the vehicle, police found a Santa suit and thousands of rounds of ammunition. The car had also been booby-trapped to explode once the Santa suit was removed. And though the vehicle exploded, no one was injured. Once Bruce's autopsy was finished, investigators were able to conclude he had committed suicide and that there was no second shooter. The autopsy also revealed he had horrific third-degree burns on his hands and arms, and part of the Santa pans had melted to his body. Police believe he didn't initially plan to kill himself, as he left no note. Around the same time, a man reported a mysterious car parked in front of his Pasadena home. Police ran the plates and found the car had been rented by Bruce Pardo. Though the car wasn't rigged, it was packed with supplies including a computer, clothes, water, food, and maps of the US and Mexico. It came out that Bruce had been planning on escaping to Mexico after his killing spree on the eve of Christmas. Bruce's getaway car was also parked about 500 feet from the house of Scott Nord, Sylvia's divorce attorney. Police believed Bruce might have planned on also murdering Scott, who presided over their somewhat contentious proceeding. In June 2008, Bruce Pardo was ordered to pay $1,785 a month in spousal support. When his divorce was finalized shortly before the holiday, the spousal support ended up being waived as at the time he had lost his job. In July of 2008, Bruce's employer realized Bruce had been fraudulently billing clients for hours he didn't actually work and was fired. A reporter said, "This divorce shattered Bruce Pardo. It became his obsession, and Bruce began to plot ways to get back at Sylvia. I think he decided that he wasn't just going to kill her, but he was going to kill everything that she loved and take it, wipe it off the face of the earth." During his Christmas Eve killing spree, Bruce pulled out a homemade flamethrower to spray 18 gallons of gasoline into the house once he ran out of bullets. But Bruce didn't realize there was an open flame somewhere inside the house, which led to an explosion that left him horrifically burned. Instead of driving to kill Sylvia's attorney, Bruce then went to his brother's house, where he killed himself because of how badly he was burned. Bruce's neighbor said, "I still wonder if the suit hadn't lit, how the story would have ended. It may have been a much different ending." In 2016, Leticia told Oprah, "I can't do anything to change what happened. I can only focus on the future. This is what he's done. Enough. I'm not going to allow you to continue to consume us with your evilness. You don't want that anger to live within you day to day and grow, just like it did with this monster." This infamous mass murder is known as the Covina Massacre that terrorized the country in the name of Christmas. No one expected that a guy dressed in a Santa Claus costume will bring impending doom to men, women, and children who are trying to enjoy the spirit of Christmas. The slang Netflix and chill has become really popular in the recent years. And while the true meaning of the slang is known to most people, I was unlucky enough to meet someone who had a twisted definition of the popular slang, Netflix and chill. My name is Nolan Hunter, and I was 17 years old when this incident happened. I was living with my brother, Landon Hunter, at the time, and he had just become a certified self-defense instructor. Seeing as it was his job, my brother was very passionate about being safe and knowing how to properly protect yourself. As with every chance he got, he was always trying to show me defensive techniques to use if I was ever in trouble. He'd say things like, "It's really dangerous out there. It's important to know how to protect yourself. You should always be safe out there because you never know when you'll find yourself in a dangerous situation." While I knew he had my best interests at heart, I really didn't care about my safety because at 17, all I really thought about were girls. Like every other teenager, once my hormones kicked in, the only thing I could think about was scoring a hot date, and on the 7th of October 2019, I finally got lucky. I had asked around, and people told me that she was a goth girl who was majorly into things of the occult. While I wasn't into that kind of stuff, I told myself she wasn't bad looking. So when she walked up to me and asked me if I wanted to come over for a Netflix and chill date, I immediately jumped at the opportunity. That night, I got ready for the date, and before I left, I told my elder brother where I was going so he wouldn't be worried. When I was done, he looked at me and said, "I don't know, man. It's pretty late. You should really tread carefully and stay safe." I then replied him with, "Bro, I'm going on a Netflix and chill date with a girl. Nothing dangerous is going to happen. Believe me, there's nothing to worry about." After that, I made my way to the door. As I left the house, I realized it was cold outside, so I went back to get a jacket. I couldn't see mine on the coat rack, and I was already running a bit late, so I just took my brother's jacket instead. I quickly made my way to Catherine's house, and once I got there, we began to talk and have a good time. As we sat down to watch Netflix, I suggested a really good show that I had seen in the past. Catherine looked at me and said, "I know something that's even better to watch." Curious, I asked, "What's the show called?" And she replied me with, "You'll see." I watched her pick up the remote as she continued the conversation with, "Have you ever heard of Netflix secret codes?" I replied her with, "Yeah, I have," as I watched her type in the code 0666. Before I could blink, numerous horrific videos immediately filled the screen. Catherine then calmly played one called Chronicles of the Occult, and I began to watch morbidly graphic videos of people being sacrificed in cult rituals. I watched in horror as numerous helpless people were propped up before strange altars. Their throats were slit and their eyes were gouged out. I had no words as I watched this ghastly horror play out before me. I slowly turned to my right to see Catherine smiling from ear to ear as she watched the morbid images. And it didn't take me long to figure out that she was really enjoying this. After the first 10 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore, so I turned to her and said, "What the hell is this?" Catherine then calmly replied me with, "It's my favorite show, and you're about to be part of it." Baffled, I said, "What the hell does that mean?" Before I could finish my sentence, two hooded figures emerged from the dark and attacked me. I tried to struggle, but it was no use as they firmly held on to me. They started to subdue me when I shouted, "What the hell is going on here, Catherine? Who are these people?" She smiled and replied me with, "You see, Nolan, the Chronicles of the Occult is a show that's made up of numerous occult eccentrics. I myself am a very huge contributor to the content shown, and today I need a sacrificial lamb to kill in my latest entry." And I thought to myself, there's no better candidate than a horny boy who would jump at the opportunity of Netflix and chill. So I invited you here under the guise of that, and now I'm going to make you a star by killing you. I watched as she spoke with so much confidence. The sight was sickening to me, as in that moment, I had lost all appeal towards the girl standing before me, as she looked truly psychotic. With no hesitation, the men started to pull me towards a room. I kept struggling with all of my strength, but it was hopeless. They took me to a room that was decorated with occultist things. I saw the skulls of animals placed around the room. Black candles were placed and lit everywhere to give the room an eerie glow. A huge demonic altar was in the middle of the room. As they brought me closer, I could see numerous blood stains on it. They propped me up on the altar as I watched Catherine get out a camera and a jagged knife. The fear of dying slowly began to paralyze me. I looked at her with utter disgust as she said to me, "Don't look at me like that, Nolan. I kept my promise, didn't I? We watched some Netflix, and now it's time for us to chill. But unfortunately for you, this is my twisted meaning of chill." They all started to laugh as she continued to set up the camera. Seeing them laugh turned my fear to anger as I kept on struggling. I pulled and tugged until I suddenly felt something in my jacket's pocket. I took a closer look out of the corner of my eye. I realized there was a can of mace in my pocket. I knew the mace belonged to my brother, as being a self-defense instructor, he carried it everywhere he went. I then remembered why I had it, as the jacket I was wearing belonged to him. Seeing that can of mace filled me with hope, as it gave me an opportunity to escape. So with all of my strength, I managed to pull one of my arms free, and in a split second, right before my throat was about to be slit, I grabbed the can of mace and sprayed it into the eyes of my attackers. Stunned, they all began to scream as the mace burnt their eyes. Not wasting a single second, I bolted to the door. I managed to make my way out of the apartment as I ran down the street. I didn't stop till I reached home. As I ran into the living room, I saw my elder brother Landon waiting for me with a worried look on his face. I was out of breath, but I managed to tell him everything that happened, and he immediately called the police. The days that followed were hectic, as a lot of questioning and interrogations were carried out. The cops who had gone to pay Catherine a visit told us that no one was there, as there was no trace of her. The cops and I then decided to reach out to Netflix to see if they knew anything about the horrific program, Chronicles of the Occult. We called them up and explained everything that happened. The Netflix worker then told us, "I'm sorry, but we know all our codes, and we can assure you that the code 0666 has never existed." On September 4th, 1972, just after midnight, a man wearing climbing spurs scaled one of the trees on the property between the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts and the Church of St. Andrew and St. Paul to access the museum's roof. He then lowered a ladder, two men waiting below. The trio entered the building through a skylight that was under repair, which had left its security alarm disabled. They descended inside from the third-storied rooftop by sliding down a 15-meter length of rope. Moving around the second floor, The intruders encountered a security guard either in or near the kitchen. When the guard didn't immediately comply with their orders, one thief fired 2 blasts from a shotgun into the ceiling. The other 2 guards on duty heard the noise and responded, but were overcome. And the security staff were bound, gagged, and left in a lecture hall on the first floor. The guards later described to police 2 men with long hair wearing ski masks and armed with guns. One spoke French and the other spoke English. They heard the voice of a third man who also spoke French, but they never saw him. The thieves spent 30 minutes gathering paintings and artifacts. They'd selected a few dozen canvases off the walls, but when an alarm on the side entrance was tripped, they fled out the door with what they could carry: 39 pieces of jewelry and 18 paintings, including works by Corot, Courbet, Delacroix, Bruegel the Elder, Rubens, and Rembrandt, then valued at $1 million. Museum officials estimated a total of $2 million in stolen property. Then curator of decorative arts, Ruth Jackson, who was among the first museum staff to report the scene, found the gallery ransacked. Shattered display cases, torn backings, and many 100-year-old frames cracked to pieces. The stack of paintings left behind contained a Picasso, an El Greco, 2 Goyas, a Renoir, and another Rembrandt. With what they'd proposed to remove, Jackson later told, the robbers meant to clear out the museum as it seems. The Wednesday prior to the MMFA robbery, there was another art theft less than an hour away. Not front-page news, but similarly sensational and Hollywoodish. On August 30th, 1972, 3 hooded armed men made off with a reported $50,000 in paintings from the Oka Summer residence of Agnes Meldrum, who ran a successful trucking and storage business in Montreal. The robbers tied up the gardener, looted the place, and climbed down what the Gazette described as a 600-foot bluff to a waiting motorboat docked below on Lake of Two Mountains. Again, 2 thieves spoke French, the other spoke English. At the time, the newspaper said police noted the similarities between the 2 crimes, though it was later concluded the thefts were unrelated. For weeks after the museum robbery, police surveilled a group of students who were known to museum staff. The tale was fruitless and eventually called off with no arrests made. Police also considered the possibility of an inside job and questioned museum staff. It was determined none were involved. In a 2010 interview, Bill Banty, museum spokesperson at the time of the robbery, now deceased, told no one on the museum staff was involved. If there was any inside information, it probably emanated from the people working on the skylight repairs. Police also questioned those workers and ultimately cleared them of any direct involvement. The first call came within days of the crime. A nasal voice with a European accent instructed the museum to send someone to a phone booth near McGill University at Sherbrooke in Metcalfe. There, the museum security director answered a call, which told him to pick up a discarded cigarette pack from the ground nearby. Inside, he found a pendant, one of the missing pieces of jewelry. Communication between the thieves and the museum continued by phone and by mail. A brown envelope received October 26, 1972, contained a snapshot, or multiple snapshots, according to some accounts, of the stolen artwork all laid out together. The envelope was marked Port of Montreal, perhaps a sign or maybe a bluff, since the city's seaport was linked with the West End Gang, an Irish crime group active then and today. The thieves asked for $500,000 for the return of the stolen goods. Then they reduced it to $250,000. Museum director David Giles Carter, also now deceased, suggested that the group surrender a painting to prove that they were still in their possession. Carter was instructed to check a locker at the rail station. He again sent the museum security director to investigate, who found one of the panels attributed to Bruegel, landscape with vehicles and cattle. Shortly after, Carter arranged an exchange of cash for an additional painting. It was to be set up, though, with an undercover cop playing the middleman sent to the meeting place with the money. But a Langale police cruiser, unaware of the operation, drove by the area and scared off the thieves, who called the museum the next day angry about the trap. Carter didn't hear from them again for months. In the early summer of 1973, A museum board member received communications from someone who said they had information about the paintings. A Montreal insurance adjuster named Andre Dequoy spoke with the anonymous caller and thought the tip held promise. The museum agreed to put up $10,000 if Dequoy would deliver the money to the caller. Dequoy set off one afternoon around 2 p.m. with an envelope full of money. He went to the downtown phone booth the caller had specified. From there, he was led to other phone booths at Bluebonnet's horse racing track on St. Laurent Boulevard and at the Henri Bourassa metro station. Dequoy crisscrossed the city, shuttling between 11 different phone booths by 4 a.m. He was finally instructed to leave the money at the foot of a sign in a vacant lot on St. Martin Boulevard. He returned to the phone booth near the Henri Bourassa metro station as instructed, where the painting's whereabouts were finally to be revealed to him. But the phone never rang. He went back to his office, and a call came through at 8 a.m. The caller told him the artwork had been left at a motel in Laval. Police combed the building, but didn't find a thing. As far as published accounts of the various recovery efforts go, the story ends here. 14 paintings were left behind in the museum, not 18. And the total value of the stolen property was significantly larger than reported. $5 million. The stolen Rembrandt alone, it said, was worth $1.75 million. A half a century after the theft, police are no closer to finding what was stolen or who stole it. In fact, they might be further away. Even the record of the crime is disappearing. Perhaps even by the time this story has gone to print, one of Montreal's missing paintings will turn up at an auction somewhere in the world. Most art recoveries happen when the party holding the property tries to monetize it. The major auction houses are committed to the restitution of stolen goods, and so the painting will be returned to its legal owner, which at this point is a group of insurance companies. Until then, there's no one to be identified for pulling off one of the biggest museum heists in the history of the world. I ruined my life with my own two hands when I was just 16 years old. I still haven't gotten over the incident, as the events of that day are continually replaying in my mind every time I close my eyes. The ruining of my life started on 12th of April, 2017. I had recently started my sophomore year at high school, but unfortunately for me, everyone avoided me as I was the freakishly manly Summer Moore. It was a bad nickname that I had been given through my school years. The reason behind the nickname was because my father used to be a professional wrestler and bodybuilder. So when I was a kid, I started to follow him around and do everything that he did. The little exercises and workouts that I had done when I was trying to be like my dad had already changed my body before my mom put a stop to it. It wasn't that bad as I was just a bit muscular and strong, but the other kids didn't see it that way, so they constantly made fun of me for it. I grew up in a Christian home, so I was told to just ignore it and be myself, which is what I did. I stayed on my own for most of my time. I ate alone and did everything by myself. But come the 12th of April, something bizarre happened. It was during the afternoon. I was sitting by myself in the cafeteria when Jennifer Martin walked up to me. I was speechless as no one paid attention to me, and the girl Jennifer was one of the most popular kids in school. Before I could say anything, she said, "Hey Summer, I'm having a sleepover with the girls tonight, and I'll love you to be there." I was too stunned to say anything, so she just continued with, "Okay, I hope you'll come. See you at 8. Bye." And with that, she walked away. That day when I went home, I was still shocked at what happened, so I told my mom. When I was done, I told her that it may be a bad idea as I didn't feel like going. But my mom was ecstatic, as she knew it had been a while since I spoke about friends or social gatherings. So she advised me to go, as she said that it'd be an amazing experience. So I really should give it a chance. So I agreed. I got ready, and I arrived there at 8 p.m. My mom bid me goodbye as she drove off. As I walked to the house, I began to ask myself, why the popular kids would invite me to their sleepover. I then remembered that me and Jennifer were childhood friends. But as we grew up, Jennifer became popular, so she stopped talking to me. So I told myself that the invitation was just Jennifer trying to do something nice. As I knocked on the door, I felt a bit nervous as I started to think I had made a bad decision. But before I could turn around, the door was open and Jennifer welcomed me in with a huge smile. As I walked in, I noticed that there were 4 other girls there. The girls were Alice, Ruby, Audrey, and Claire, all the popular girls, with Jennifer, host of the sleepover. It didn't take long before the sleepover activity started, as they began to do each other's makeup and have pillow fights. I didn't participate much as I felt like the odd one out at the gathering, so I just sat by myself. I began to feel homesick, and something told me to call my mom, but it was already pretty late, so I knew I had to sleep there. I did nothing for a while, till Claire suggested that we play the creepy game, Light as a Feather. I didn't join in as I grew up in a Christian home, and I was advised to stay away from the so-called silly, creepy games, as most of them were really evil and they attracted bad things. So I told them that I wasn't going to do it, as the game didn't sit right with me. They all ignored me and began to play the game by themselves. The lights were turned off, and Audrey said, "I should be the one in the middle. I'm lightweight." So they put her in the middle and began to repeatedly chant the mantra, "Light as a feather, stiff as a board." I don't know if it was just me, but I felt the air become a bit dense as I began to get some chills. I watched them continue to chant the words repeatedly in the dark, and I began to feel uneasy. That's when the cupboard at the end of the room creaked open. The hair on my hands began to stand on end as I looked closer at the cupboard. I couldn't believe my eyes as I saw a petrifying being walking out of the cupboard. I couldn't see it well as it was dark, but I could make out its deformed face and the long horns that protruded from its head. It began to walk closer and approach me. I couldn't take it anymore, so I screamed. My scream brought the attention of all the other girls towards me, as they all slowly turned to look at me before they began to laugh. They all laughed at me and they started to tease me. All the while, the demon was still approaching me. My mind didn't know what was going on, as I didn't know if the demon was real or fake. I didn't know if it was a prank or if they had all been possessed, as the sight of them laughing in the darkness was uncanny. With so much to process, I felt my fear turn into searing anger as my blood began to boil. I don't know why, but it was as if my body had a mind of its own as I stood up and lunged at the demon. With all my strength, I toppled it down and I started to punch it severely. The other girls began to rush towards me as they tried to pull me off. They were screaming words at me, but I couldn't hear anything. My mind had completely zoned out all the noise as I kept beating down on the demon. I began to strangle it with all my strength as I felt myself squeeze the life out of it. It had stopped moving before I heard someone scream the word, "Stop!" The lights were put on, and I saw Miss Martin standing in the room. I looked down to see blood on my hands as she approached me and pulled me off the supposed demon. With the lights on, I could see that the thing lying down on the floor was a high-end demon costume, as it looked extremely real. And that's when the horrific realization dawned on me, as I realized someone was in it. The bloody mask was removed, and on the floor laid a beaten-up Jennifer. Her face was disfigured and bloody, and she wasn't moving. Jennifer's mother began to check her vitals, but nobody needed to tell me, as I knew she was already dead. My life was turned upside down after that night. A kid was dead, and I was the murderer. My parents fought tooth and nail to make sure nothing happened to me. I was 16, so the case was handled by the juvenile justice system. Investigations were carried out, and it was revealed that the whole thing was a prank planned by Jennifer. The remaining girls confessed that Jennifer orchestrated the whole thing, as since we were childhood friends, she knew most things about me, which is why she predicted that I wouldn't participate in the game. So under the guise of darkness, she left the room and turned down the heat to make the house cold, which explained why the air felt dense to me. She then dressed up in a really expensive and realistic costume. She then decided to scare me while the others laughed. No one expected the outcome to be like this. During the following months, it became case after case, hearing after hearing. My lawyer said I was mentally and psychologically abused, so I acted under trauma and self-defense. But the Martins didn't give up, as no matter how anyone put it, I killed their daughter, regardless of how mean or how wrong she was. I saw how Miss Martin looked at me that night, as I knew she would have killed me if my mom hadn't showed up on time. I know she still wants to make me and my family suffer, which they haven't given up till this day, as it's still lawsuit after lawsuit. They said no matter what happened, they'd never let the case stop till they are given justice. So the case is constantly being reviewed. I made the lives of my family a living hell, as every new year, we constantly visit the court. While I know they'd never give up on me, sometimes I just wish I could plead guilty and go to prison, as even if that would be bad for me, I know it would relieve my family from all the pain and frustration that I have caused these past few years. The incident took place on April 3rd, 1997, in Itaewon, Seoul. Jo Jung-pil, a 22-year-old college student who was on a date with his girlfriend, headed to Itaewon to pick up his girlfriend. And he was in a hurry to go to the bathroom. So he went with his girlfriend to a Burger King on the main road. And while he was going to the bathroom, his girlfriend ordered a hamburger and waited for Mr. Jung-pil. However, after 5 or 10 minutes, Jung-pil didn't come back. And at the time, a man came out from the bathroom covering his mouth. Feeling something strange, the girlfriend headed to the bathroom and got shocked seeing Mr. Jung-pil lying in the inner corner of the bathroom in a sea of blood. Jung-pil's neck was full of stab wounds, and blood was all over his clothes. She realized he had already stopped breathing a while ago. This case is known as the Itaewon murder case. Jung-pil, who has never missed first or second place in the entire school and never rotted inside, is the youngest among 1 son and 3 daughters, and the 3rd-generation reader. He grew up receiving a lot of love in his family, but he suffered such an absurd death. The next day after this incident, the U.S. military unit received a report that someone had seen a young boy named Patterson stabbing a man. Patterson was immediately arrested, and the case was all set to be resolved smoothly. However, Patterson admitted that the crime was committed by his friend Eddie, not himself. He said he went to the hamburger shop downstairs because he was hungry after drinking with friends at a club in Itaewon on the day of the incident. And then, a Korean man went into the bathroom, and Eddie said, "Let's go to the bathroom because I'll show you something cool." Then Eddie stabbed the victim to death. Investigators rushed to Eddie's house to arrest him. However, he was meeting with a lawyer at the time and was questioned after his voluntary appearance. And Eddie's statement was the exact opposite of Patterson's. He said that Patterson had something to show him and asked him to go to the bathroom, and as he was going to wash his hands, he followed him. While he was washing his hands, Patterson kept stabbing Mr. Jung-pil, and Eddie said the scene was unbelievable and felt like he was watching a movie. Due to the conflicting statements and blame game played by the two, the U.S. Criminal Investigation Team summoned friends who were with them that night to investigate. Their friends told shocking stories. After the hamburgers got served to their table, Patterson pulled a jackknife out of his pocket. This was the same knife used in the crime. Then Eddie said to Patterson, "Hey, have you stabbed a person with a knife before? Go and stab someone." At that moment, Jung-pil went to the bathroom, and these two people followed him with some serious sick minds. But after coming out of the bathroom, the behavior of these two men was quite different. Eddie came up to the club, but his white shirt was covered in blood, as if he had been sprayed with it. And he said, "We stabbed a man in the neck with a knife." His friends were shaken and went to the bathroom to find Mr. Jung-pil was lying there. When friends asked him, "Did you kill someone?" Eddie said, "It's not me. Patterson did it just for fun." On the other hand, Patterson left the bathroom and went to the club's bathroom without returning to the club. Patterson, whose head, shirt, pants, and hands were bloody, hurriedly drained the blood into the bathroom, changed into a friend's clothes, borrowed a hat, and left the club in a hurry. Then he returned to the U.S. military base, burned his blood-stained shirt, and even destroyed evidence by throwing the knife into the sewer that he used in the crime. Their friends also revealed that Patterson was a member of a gang called Nordy 14, and that the gang's attack method was similar to the murder of Mr. Jung-pil. The U.S. investigator was convinced that the culprit was Patterson and handed over the findings to the South Korean prosecutors. But the case took an unexpected turn. Prosecutor Park, a veteran who had handled more than 100 murders alone, couldn't believe the investigation by the U.S. investigator. So he reinvestigated the case from the beginning and was convinced that the killer was Eddie. He had 3 reasons to think that Eddie was the culprit. One of them is the memory of a murderer. He paid attention to the difference between Eddie, who was surprised at the time that he couldn't remember the specifics, and Patterson, who remembered everything in detail, including the attack site, the crime method, and the number of attacks. And he said, "When you stab a person with a knife and see blood, it is common sense in criminal psychology that you lose your temper and cannot remember what happened after that." He said, "Based on this common theory, we can point out the fact that Eddie, who failed to give the details in the beginning of the interrogation, is the murderer." However, criminal psychology experts were puzzled by Prosecutor Park's opinion. Professor Lee Soo-jung agrees that the criminal's memory is inaccurate. He further added, "I am making such statements because I have sensory information that I feel in my fingers. Eyewitnesses do not make such statements." Prosecutor Park paid attention to the opinion of the forensic scientist who was in charge of the autopsy, saying, "The perpetrator is likely to be taller than the victim. Also, since there are no signs of defense, the perpetrator seems to be strong enough to subdue the victim." Prosecutor Park thought the culprit was not Patterson, who was 172 centimeters tall and 63 kilograms in weight, but Eddie, who was 180 centimeters tall and weighed 105 kilograms. The forensic scientist said, "I was talking about the possibility, but Prosecutor Park's thoughts were already tilted." And finally, the reason that Prosecutor Park had no choice but to be sure was the lie detector. He asked Patterson and Eddie the same question. "Are you the one who stabbed Jo Jung-pil?" And both denied the crime and pointed out the other as the culprit. But the polygraph's results were different. Agitated Eddie and stable Patterson. The detector revealed that Eddie lied and Patterson told the truth. If you are nervous, you may get a false reaction even though it is true. And in the case of a sociopath, the results of a lie detector that could not be detected was not accepted as evidence in court. However, Prosecutor Park believed this result 100% and concluded that Eddie was the murderer. Prosecutors charged Eddie with murder and Patterson with possession of a weapon and destruction of evidence. Even in court, the 2 statements continued to contradict each other. 2 people claiming to be the culprits. However, as a result of the first trial, Eddie was sentenced to life in prison and Patterson was sentenced to only 1 year and 6 months in prison for destroying evidence. However, much has been said about this verdict. Patterson and Eddie are 17 years old, with a maximum sentence of 20 years in court. But the judge sentenced them to life in prison. However, it was revealed that this was an error caused by ignorance of the law and not for any other reason. This was corrected in the second trial. Eddie was sentenced to 20 years in prison for murder, and Patterson was sentenced to 1 year and 6 months in prison. However, this decision was again overturned by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court held a trial again, saying that there was insufficient evidence that Eddie was a murderer, and Eddie was acquitted at the trial again. If Eddie isn't the culprit is Patterson. However, Patterson, who had to be held captive, had already been released after serving his sentence. Patterson, who received a suspended sentence, was released before Eddie's trial was over. Suspension of execution is possible only when life in prison is impossible, and the reason for this permission is determined. But Patterson was nowhere to be found. In response, the National Assembly asked the Minister of Justice why the sentence was suspended for him. However, he could not give an accurate answer, saying, "I think it was best based on the behavioral record." In this situation, the injustice of the victims' families only worsened. Jung-pil's mother filed a complaint asking Patterson to be punished, but he had already left Korea. Patterson, who had been suspended from departure, took a flight confidently at the airport and departed in August 1999. How the hell did this happen? The prosecutor was unaware of Patterson's departure from the country. In particular, he was shocked when it was announced that he only found out about it 3 months after leaving the country. And this fact was covered up by the prosecution. To relieve the sorrow of their son who died unfairly, the victim's family repeatedly asked for help from the country and the law. But the answer they always got back was, "It's not easy. There is no way unless the U.S. helps." The family then filed a lawsuit directly in the U.S. courts. 18 years after the incident, the Supreme Court's final decision got made. The Supreme Court said it has been proven beyond any doubt that Patterson murdered the victim. Patterson was sentenced with the judge explaining that the court decided on a life sentence, but in view of the defendant's age of being under 18 at the time, the sentence will be 20 years in prison. Saco, Maine, just outside of Portland, is your typically beautiful New England town. And Ashley Ouellette was your typical 15-year-old girl. When Ashley asked her mom if she could sleep over at a friend's house, there really was no cause for concern. At just after 10 p.m. on February 9th, 1999, Lise got a goodnight call from Ashley. The last words she ever heard from her daughter. 6 hours later, at almost exactly 4 a.m., a man driving home from work sees something in the road ahead. As he gets closer, he realizes to his horror, it's a dead teenager. It's Ashley Ouellette, strangled to death with her neck broken. How did Ashley get from the safety of a friend's sleepover to the hard, cold asphalt of Pine Point Road in a neighboring town nearly 10 miles away? It doesn't take long to piece together the last few hours of Ashley's life. The timeline begins at 10 p.m., just after her goodnight call to her mom. Ashley and her sleepover friends are visited by a few boys from school, and Ashley's mom says she was told one of the boys was named Jay Carney. So the girls let them in and the girls started talking, and then they said that they were heading up to the Sanborn house, said Lise Ouellette, the home of Earl and Muriel Sanborn. Their sons, Stephen and Danny, are also Ashley's classmates. I think she wanted to be with Stephen, said Elise. I think she had a crush on him, but I don't think she ever was involved with him. And that's the thing. She wanted to see Stephen that night, from what the girls said. According to a friend, Ashley stayed at the Sanborns' house while the other girls went home. What happens next depends on who you ask. The Sanborn boys and their parents have told police Ashley was offered a place to sleep on their couch, but they claim she left on her own after they all went to bed. It's about 10 miles from the Sanborn residence to Ashley's home. Police are suspicious and get a search warrant for the Sanborn home and Daniel's car. They want to know what happened at the Sanborns. According to published news reports, police retrieve what appears to be splats of blood and evidence of sexual activity from the Sanborn home. They also impound Danny Sanborn's car. They find patches of dry brown grass similar to grass found on Ashley's body. Raising even more suspicion, Danny can't keep his story straight. In an affidavit, he first says he went to school that morning. Later, Danny changes his story and tells authorities he spent the day at the beach. To Ashley's family, that's reason for suspicion. But it's not enough for cops to make an arrest or file charges. Police won't name a suspect. Despite Ashley's mom's beliefs, Danny Sanborn denies any involvement and has never been charged in connection with Ashley's murder. He and his brother Stephen, along with his parents, have been questioned by the cops several times, and they've never been charged with any wrongdoing either. Crime Watch Daily did confirm Danny Sanborn does have a long rap sheet. He's been convicted of assault on a police officer and spent 3 years in prison after being busted for heroin possession with intent to distribute. The Maine State Police calls this an open, ongoing, and confidential investigation and will not comment at this time. But there is one person who claims he knows who did it. The man who could solve the murder mystery goes missing. As police continue the search for Ashley Ouellette's killer, another family begins the search for their missing son. And the two cases would cross paths. Ashley was strangled to death and her neck was reportedly broken. Then, somebody dumped her body on a desolate road in Saco, Maine before dawn on a cold February morning. In the tangled web of rumor and suspicion, there's one young man who says he knows for sure who did it. But this horrible secret would disappear with him 3 months later. Tony Torres was a popular, athletic young man from the area who had moved to Massachusetts for college. He was a good son who always made time for family, said Narciso Torres, Tony's father. His last trip home was no different. He came to honor his mom on Mother's Day, and it was just like any other visit, telling us how he was doing in school and life seemed good for him. Tony also never missed a chance to hang out with his high school friends back home. That spring break, The party talk around the area was consumed with who killed Ashley Hewlett. Everybody in the small town was talking about it. In fact, one night at home with his parents, Tony drops a chilling revelation about her murder. He didn't tell us who, but he said he knows who did it. And he said it in a way that he left no doubt, said Narciso Torres. We were in the living room watching the news, and the story of Ashley Hewlett came up, and he immediately said, "I know who killed her. I knew the people who killed her," said Narciso. And I cautioned him, "You're either going to go to the police with this information, or you're going to keep your mouth shut. But be careful who you share this with." At the time, I didn't know how much to believe that he actually knew, and a little part of me feared for him. Because, witnesses can be silenced. I wish I could go back now and pick him up by his shirt and say, "We're going to the police right now," said Narciso. But I didn't do that. Tony's dad was right to be concerned. 3 months later, after Ashley's murder, Tony mysteriously vanishes. Tony's parents shared with Crime Watch Daily the timeline of that night as told to them by police. At 2 a.m., Tony is partying at his ex-girlfriend's apartment. A close friend of the Sanborns, Jay Carney, was also there. Tony and Carney leave together for a store on the corner. A short time later, Carney comes back alone. Tony is never seen again. Jay Carney is the same guy who reportedly gave Ashley a ride to the Sanborns the night she was murdered. Tony has been missing for 17 years. He was declared dead in 2004, but his body has never been recovered. His family believes there's a connection between Ashley's murder and Tony's disappearance. Both Ashley's murder and Tony's disappearance are open and active cases, and Maine State Police will not comment about either one of them right now. Maine State Police are no longer talking. Both investigations are still open, but police are not releasing any records. Nobody has ever been charged with either crime. We don't know where Tony is. Is he dead or alive? And what exactly happened that night? I always hated Christmas. Most people would probably call me a curmudgeon for saying that, but it's a lot easier to enjoy a winter holiday when you have a warm house to sleep in and a family to spend it with. For those who aren't rich and upper middle class, Christmas is just another cold day during the brutal winter, where your chances of dying from hypothermia in the streets increase exponentially. I can't remember the days when I had a roof over my head. Hell, I'm not sure if those days even exist. I spent every Christmas watching happy people spend time with their families from the shadows of the alleys where they could easily ignore me. The only good thing about Christmas for me was being able to rummage through restaurant dumpsters for other people's leftovers. It never ceases to amaze me how much food people were willing to just throw away while eating out. I had to be fast though, or else the restaurant owner might come to chase me away for messing with their garbage. Why they'd even care about someone taking stuff they'd already thrown out anyways, I'll never understand. One Christmas, as I was looking through a dumpster for some turkey bones to gnaw on, I was approached by an old man. I was ready to run away the moment I saw him, but he stopped me before I could. "Wait, lass, I'm not here to hurt you. What do you want then?" He spoke calmly to me, but my own words were harsh. It might seem mean, but I didn't survive by myself in the streets for so long, being nice. Just to help a young woman out alone in the cold. "My name's Charles. What's yours?" "Susan." "Nice to meet you, Susan. Do you have a home to go to?" I did, but the snow ruined my last cardboard box. "Oh, I see. Well, would you like a place to sleep for the night?" "What?" "I have a house nearby. You could stay in for the night. It's cold out there. You look like you could use a meal, too. Why would you want to help me?" "Well, it's Christmas, and I'm full of the holiday spirit. Helping out a poor girl in the snow seems like something both Christ and Santa would approve of." My common sense told me to run. No good thing could ever come from going into the house of a stranger who's promising you food. I really wasn't buying his bullshit explanation about the holiday spirit either. But regardless of what my brain thought, my stomach was growling, and the rest of my body wouldn't have lasted much longer out in the snow. It was especially cold that December, and I already found a couple of other homeless people dead and buried in the snow earlier in the month. If I didn't find warmth soon, I would join them. Seeing as how my life couldn't get much worse, and I'd probably die without shelter anyways, I decided to take the old man up on his offer. I followed Charles throughout the city, past smiling people who must have assumed we were just an old man and his granddaughter spending Christmas together. We reached a little two-story house at the end of a nice neighborhood in the city. Charles opened the door with his keys and led me inside. The house was already fully decked out in Christmas decorations, including a grand tree in the living room adorned with shiny bulbs and a golden star at the top. But aside from the traditional Christmas decor, lifelike dolls with closed eyes dressed like elves also sat upon the shelves. What's with the dolls? Ah, those are my products. I'm a custom doll maker by trade, you see. Business is always good during Christmas. Lots of parents want dolls for their little girls. What's so special about these dolls? A proud smile spread across Charles's face. Children like to play with dolls, but my dolls are the only ones in the world that can play with the children back. How the heck does that work? Charles put a finger to his lips in a shushing gesture. That's a trade secret. But I'll tell you this. To make something this special for children, you need to have the heart of a child. I assumed that he was making a metaphor I didn't get. I couldn't even understand why anyone would buy those creepy dolls in the first place, so I quickly followed Charles out of the living room to get away from their gaze. He led me to the dining room, where the table was set with the kind of Christmas feast I'd only ever seen in billboard commercials. There were plates of honeyed ham, roast beef and potatoes, mince pie, and a gigantic cooked goose at the center of it all. I'd never seen so much food in one place before in my life. Dig in, Susan. Are you sure? Of course. It's because of children like you that I'm able to make a living. Think of this as me giving back to the children for all they've done for my business. Any hesitance I still had left me. I sat down at the table and started gorging myself on the food. Charles went back to the living room and picked out a closed-eye elf doll from the shelf. I'm going to work on this doll some more. I got deadlines to meet after all. In the meantime, help yourself to all the food you like. After that, he disappeared into the basement with the doll, and I continued to stuff my face with food. I almost regained my faith in humanity then. But just before I could get to the Christmas pudding, I felt a tiny hand grab my wrist. I turned and saw a little boy who couldn't have been any older than 5. He wore the same elf outfit the closed-eyed dolls on the shelves did, and it was about the same size too. You need to leave now. What? But Charles told me he's not who you think he is. You have to leave this place for your own sake. The boy let go of my wrist and took a step back. Please, get out and stay safe. Once he finished talking, he scurried out of the dining room with surprising speed. Hey, wait! I rushed after him into the living room, but found no one there with the dolls. I could have sworn one of those closed-eyed dolls looked exactly like him, but I chalked that up to my mind playing tricks on me. I looked through both floors of the house for him, but found nothing but more Christmas decorations and more creepy dolls. Worried that that boy might have been Charles's relative, I went down into the basement to let him know that he was missing. I slowly descended on the stairs to the basement, trying to make my footsteps as soft as possible. I didn't want to accidentally break his concentration and ruin what he was working on by startling him in the middle of it. I will never forget what I saw in that basement. Charles was at a workbench with the elf doll from the living room on it. He didn't seem to be doing any delicate work, so I was about to call out to him but stopped myself just in time when I saw something hanging from a hook beside the workbench. At first I thought it was just another doll, but it was far too big to be one, and its eyes were actually open. After a moment, I realized what it was and had to stifle a scream. It was a corpse of a child about my age, who bore a striking resemblance to the elf doll on the workbench, hung upside down by his feet on a meat hook. Charles brought out a long knife from his workbench and plunged it into the dead child. With surgical precision, he dragged it down over his chest. Then he reached inside and ripped out the child's heart. I watched in silent horror as he opened a compartment in the elf's doll's chest and placed the heart inside. Seconds later, the elf doll's eyes flew wide open with a look of abject terror. "Where am I? Charles, what's happened?" Before the doll could finish, Charles gagged it with a piece of cloth and threw it into a nearby chest. "I'll start conditioning you later. I have to go prepare a sister for you first." I ran out of the house as quickly as I could. I ran to the nearest police station. I usually avoided the police like the plague, but this time around, I decided to make an exception. I told them that I'd been kidnapped by Charles and told him his address, leaving out the parts about the living dolls. I stayed in the police station lobby to answer questions while they checked out Charles's house. Not long after, the TV screen in the police lobby showed a live footage of Charles's house burning. According to the reporter, he set fire to his house the moment police officers came knocking on his door. They went on to talk about his history, how he used to be a sweet family man, beloved by the community, and how much of a shock this was for all those who knew him. They showed a photo of him with his late family on the screen, and I felt my heart fall to my stomach. Standing in between Charles and his wife in that photo was a little boy who looked exactly like the one I met at the house. The one who told me to leave his father's house because he didn't want to see another child meet the same fate he did. I guess in his obsession to create the perfect lifelike dolls, Charles didn't mind testing his methods out with his very own son. My boyfriend was Jewish, and though I wasn't Jewish or even particularly religious myself, I loved learning about his culture and traditions. One December, he asked me to sleep over at his family's house during the 8 days of Hanukkah. You don't have to stay for Hanukkah if you don't want to, but it'd be a great opportunity for you to get closer with my family and learn about our culture. I'd love to go, but there's just one problem. What is it? You remember that I live with my grandpa, right? I'd been living with my grandfather and taking care of him for the past 2 years. Because of his age, he was barely strong enough to get around with the help of a walking stick. I don't think I can leave my grandpa alone at the house for 8 whole days. He'll either trip on the stairs or burn the house down trying to cook while I'm gone. Oh, you can bring him over too if you'd like. Will that really be all right? Of course. I've been curious to meet this grandpa of yours for a while anyways. Later that day, I talked with my grandfather about staying over at my boyfriend's house for Hanukkah. He didn't seem to like the idea very much, but I was the one bringing home the bread and paying the bills, so he didn't have much room to argue. On the first day of Hanukkah, I arrived at the house with my grandfather, and they all greeted us with open arms. There was my boyfriend, Jacob, his little brother Noah, and his father and mother. While I caught up with my Jacob's parents, my grandfather sat on a sofa seat next to the fireplace with a grumpy frown on his face. Little Noah, being the energetic little kid he was, pestered the cranky old coot non-stop. My grandfather was probably the oldest person he'd ever met, so he kept asking him questions about what is it like being old and if he had any stories about his life. How do you live so long? Do you think you'll reach 100? What do you do for fun without any video games? How is life like without the internet? My grandfather would give short, often sarcastic answers to the young boy's questions, but never told him to stop asking them. Though he was still kind of crotchety, as the night went on, I'd sometimes catch the faintest hint of a smile on my grandfather's face as he chatted with Noah. He would never admit it, but I think my grandfather liked the special attention young Noah gave him. Soon after the sun had set, the family and I gathered around the front window to light the first candle on the Hanukkah menorah. Even my grandfather decided to pay attention to the ceremony from the comfort of his sofa seat. Jacob's father was the one who did the honors, but the moment he lit the candle for the center branch, the flame on the wick turned from vibrant orange to azure blue. That doesn't look right. Who cares? It's pretty. In the end, we chalked it up to something wrong with the cheap candlesticks they bought and didn't think much of it. Besides, the menorah was just one part in celebrating Hanukkah. We spent the rest of the night watching TV, playing dreidel, and stuffing our faces with oily latkes potato pancakes. At the end of the night, the family and I exchanged some small gifts before reciting some prayers. I couldn't understand a lick of the prayers since they were all in Hebrew, but I was just glad to be part of the festivities. My grandfather didn't have much energy to do much but eat from the comfort of his chair. But I like to think he had some fun too. The next few days went by in much the same way each night. My grandfather got more and more comfortable with Jacob's family during each day. However, the nights were a different matter. Each night, we would gather to add another candlestick to the Hanukkah menorah, which would always burn blue. And later, as we slept, I would hear my grandfather mutter in his sleep in the large guest room we shared. A lot of it was in German, which I couldn't understand. The only bit of English that I could catch from his nightly ramblings was something about a destroying angel. It all came to a head on the sixth night, when he woke up screaming in the middle of the night. Jacob and Noah rushed over from the bedroom beside ours, and I tried to calm him down as well. "Everything's all right, sir. You're safe here." "Yeah, it's okay to be scared of the dark. I used to be afraid too. Do you want to use my nightlight?" My grandfather chuckled at Noah's offer. The thought of sleeping with a nightlight must have been so funny to him that he couldn't help but laugh. "I'm all right, boy. I just had a nightmare is all. You get a lot of those when you're as old and miserable as I am. I'll be all right in the morning." The following morning, Noah brought out an old shoebox from his room and handed it to my grandfather. "What is this?" "It's your Hanukkah present. Most of us didn't think you'd showed up, so none of us really prepared anything for you." "No need to call us out like that." "So I decided to give you something of mine for Hanukkah." My grandfather opened the old shoebox. Inside was a little teddy bear with scruffy brown hair and black button eyes. "What is this?" "That's my Gollum, my old teddy bear. He used to protect me from all the monsters in my nightmares when I was little. Now, he can protect you from yours." For a moment, my grandfather just stared at the teddy bear in silent disbelief. Then tears filled his eyes as he hugged both Noah and his gift equally tight in his arms while struggling to mutter his thanks in between sobs. On the 8th night of Hanukkah, the last night, the family gathered once more to light the last candle on the menorah. The moment the last candle was lit, everything in the room went silent. The fireplace burned without crackling, and the wind outside howled without making a sound. Before anyone could say anything to break the silence, the lights in the house flickered. When they came back on, a hooded figure was standing in the middle of the living room. It was unnaturally tall and wore a black hooded robe that obscured its face in shadow. Its hands, the only visible part of its flesh, was chalk white and slender, like that of a woman's. Surprised, Jacob's father rushed to confront the figure. The moment he got close, the figure touched him on the forehead, and he immediately slumped on the floor. His wife screamed and ran to him with Noah beside her. The figure placed its hands on their foreheads as well, and they fell onto the floor as well, unconscious but still breathing. Jacob rushed to the kitchen and came back to the living room holding a knife. "Mary, take your grandpa upstairs." "But..." "Mary, now!" Despite my worry, I grabbed my grandfather and helped him up the stairs and into the guest bedroom. I locked the door and grabbed the nearest weapon, a baseball bat. I waited in that bedroom with my grandfather for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the figure downstairs to make its presence known. When it did, the figure didn't knock or bang on the door. Instead, it simply walked right through the solid door as if it weren't there. I tightened my grip on the baseball bat and was about to rush at it when my grandfather laid a hand on my shoulder to stop me. "It's all right, Mary." "Grandpa?" "Everything will be all right. Just let me talk to them." Before I could stop him, my grandfather walked right up to the figure and stared straight into the shadow of its hood. "Are you here to kill me?" I'm not sure if I was seeing things or not, but I could have sworn I saw the thing nod slightly in response. My grandfather merely let out a sigh. "Thank God." But please, can I talk to my granddaughter one last time before I go?" The hooded figure did not answer, but since he was still alive, my grandfather must have taken it as a yes. He turned to me and took a deep breath. "Mary, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. This will be the last time we speak." "Grandpa, what are you—" "Please, Mary, just listen. It's all right. I've lived for far longer than I deserved anyways. But before I go, I need you to know why it has to be this way. A long time ago, when I was a young man, I was a soldier in the Nazi army. I hated Jews then. I thought they were the reason why Germany fell from grace. I've killed them thinking they were monsters and escaped to America after the war ended, not to be tried for my crimes. It looks like they've finally caught up to me though." "Grandpa!" "It's fine, Mary. This is what I want, and it's more than I deserve. I got to meet your wonderful boyfriend and his lovely family. These past 8 days have been the happiest days in my long, sad, hateful life. Now I see that the Jews were never the monsters. I was. And monsters need to be killed so good people can live without fear." Those were the last words my grandfather ever spoke to me. When he was finished, the destroying angel placed a hand on his head, and his body immediately went limp. But before he could hit the ground, the angel caught his lifeless body and gently placed him on the bed. And with that, the angel was gone, vanished right before my eyes, leaving me alone in the room with my grandfather dead on the bed and my boyfriend's family asleep downstairs. It's been years since that day. I'm getting married to Jacob in a traditional Jewish wedding. Nobody but me remembers being visited by the destroying angel that Hanukkah. When everyone woke up later that night, they had no memory of the hooded figure that appeared and assumed that they passed out from exhaustion. The paramedic who came to take my grandfather's body determined the cause of death to be of old age. I don't know where my grandfather is now. I can only hope that my grandfather found enough redemption in those 8 days of Hanukkah for God to forgive him. As a child, I often heard the phrase, "ignorance is bliss," as it's better not knowing than to know at all. Let's take fast food, for example, as it's the perfect representation of ignorance. People constantly eat from them not knowing what's going on behind the scene or how the food they are pushing down their throats are made. My name is Miles Baker, and I used to be a health inspector. I saw firsthand what goes on behind the scenes of a particular fast food restaurant, and even if it's a bit late, I have decided to share my story with all of you today. It happened on the 7th of May, 2016. I was called and given the task to do a health inspection on a strange Burger King joint that was located on the outskirts of town. I accepted the task and I made my way out there. It was a long drive, but I eventually got there. Due to the distance, I expected the place to be empty and deserted. But when I entered, I was baffled as the place was brimming with customers. I watched them as they gluttonously devoured huge amounts of burgers and kept ordering more. I just assumed that the people who lived around these parts were really hungry, as that was the only explanation my mind could think of. A man then walked up to me and said, "Good morning, Mr. Miles. My name is Maxwell Adams. I'm the manager. We've been expecting you." He had a huge smile on his face as he introduced himself, but I could tell that he was forcing it. It was also pretty obvious that he didn't want me here, but I didn't care, as I knew I had a job to do, so I shook his hand and we began the inspection. The manager, Mr. Maxwell, began to take me around the building while assuring me that the restaurant was as safe and sanitary as it could be. I don't know why, but I didn't believe him, and as I could tell that there was something wrong about the place. So I began to dig deeper as I continued to look around. I walked into the kitchen and something caught my eye. I saw gray-like tissue substances, and I was wondering what they were, so I asked the manager, "What is this?" He hesitated for a while before saying one word with a huge smile on his face. Meat. I immediately felt disgusted as I wasn't prepared to hear that, so I shouted, "Are you crazy? Meat isn't supposed to look like that. Are you feeding this to people? Where's this from?" Mr. Maxwell looked at me calmly before replying, Regardless of the color, I can assure you that the meat we serve is pristine. And if you would calm down, I can personally take you to where we make our meat. The farm is just around the corner. I was baffled to hear that they produced their own meat nearby, but I figured since the restaurant was on the outskirts of town, it would be possible. So I agreed to follow him as I needed to get to the bottom of the matter before I reported it. It was a pretty quick drive as the farm was very close. The farm was really huge as again, it was built on the outskirts of town. As soon as we arrived, I immediately asked the question. I want to see the animals. Mr. Maxwell hesitated for a few moments before saying, Fine, but just keep in mind that these aren't your normal day-to-day cows, as our cows are extremely special. I didn't know what he meant by that till he took me to where the cows were being kept. I tried to hold down the bile coming out of my throat as I saw the animals. The cows that were presented to me looked completely abnormal. Some of them had huge bodies and skinny legs that were so fattened that they couldn't even carry themselves. Some had extremely long bodies and deformities. Some were so obese I couldn't tell if they were breathing or if they could even move. And most of them had started developing mutations. With one look at these animals, I knew that they were all suffering, as whatever they had done to them on the farm wasn't normal. I looked to Mr. Maxwell and I began to stutter, saying, "Oh, what are you doing to these animals?" Mr. Maxwell, who now had a sick grin on his face, replied me with, "We are making them meat befitting for kings." Confused, I kept quiet as he continued with, "We are Burger King, and we knew that normal cows won't do. So all we did is inject them with our homemade steroid hormone drugs and put them through a little radiation." I froze when I heard the words steroid hormone drugs, as these were drugs that were used to increase the growth rate of animals. Now these drugs were widely used and approved by the FDA, but I knew something was wrong when the words homemade were added to it. Still confused, I looked at him and asked, "What do you mean by homemade? What's in the drugs that you inject into these animals, Mr. Maxwell? And are those chemicals FDA approved?" Mr. Maxwell then responded me with, "None of that matters, Mr. Miles. All that really matters is that we have created better meat, kingly meat." I was so furious now, so I shouted, "What the hell are you talking about? You're pumping these animals full of unapproved and illegal drugs just so that you can make them bigger? Look at them, Mr. Maxwell. These animals are suffering. You fatten them up to the point of explosion. And you use their contaminated, discolored meat to feed people? Indirectly putting dangerous chemicals into their systems and threatening their health. This is wrong on so many levels. Can't you see that?" "Unfortunately, I can't, Mr. Miles. I don't know why you don't understand and see the beautiful thing we've accomplished here. By our hands, we have evolved these creatures, made them better than what they used to be. So what if the meat is discolored? I can assure you that it tastes divine. That's why the seats are always full in this establishment. We have refined these normal beasts into something better, and you should be able to see the greatness in that." When he was done with his speech, I looked at the man standing before me, and I was revolted. I never knew that human beings could be so sick. I then sternly said to him, "This is animal abuse, Mr. Maxwell, and I'm going to report it immediately." I turned my back to leave as I heard him say, "Well, I wouldn't want anything to happen to sweet Adeline, because if you report this, we will surely get our hands on her, and that's when you'd know the true definition of animal abuse." I froze when I heard the name of my 7-year-old daughter. I was about to lunge at him when he said, "You don't think we'd do our homework on you before you came here?" "Oh, please, Mr. Miles. We know everything about you, and if you ever decide to cross us, we will act in our own interest. You're just a lowly health inspector, and you must be stupid if you think you can go against a huge corporation. So keep your mouth shut and remember, ignorance is bliss. Have a good day, Mr. Miles." And with that, he walked away from me. I knew my hands were tied as everything he said was true. So I kept my mouth shut and I didn't tell a single soul. Due to the threats, it took me 2 years before I finally gathered the courage to tell my story. I took the necessary measures to keep me and my daughter safe as I asked for me and Adeline to be put under witness protection. I told them everything, and later during the weeks that followed, the closing down of a shady Burger King restaurant was all over the news. And for the first time in a long while, I finally felt at peace. I took a huge risk doing all this and sharing my story because I knew that even though ignorance is bliss, people always deserve to know the truth. The Antwerp diamond heist, dubbed the heist of the century, was the largest diamond heist of all time. Since then, the heist was classified to be one of the largest robberies in history. Thieves stole loose diamonds, gold, silver, and other types of jewelry valued at more than $100 million. It took place in Antwerp, Belgium, during the weekend of the 15th and 16th February 2003. Though arrests were made and time was served, most of the diamonds stolen remain unrecovered. The vault that housed the diamonds is situated 2 floors below the main floor. It was protected by multiple security mechanisms, including a lock with 100 million possible combinations. The building itself had a private security force and was located in the heavily guarded and monitored Antwerp Diamond District. The theft was carried out by a 5-man team, led by Leonardo, a professional thief who was skilled in social manipulation. Leonardo had rented space in the Diamond District and was arrested after being connected to the crime by DNA evidence from a partially eaten salami sandwich found near the crime scene. In addition to Leonardo, the team consisted of at least 4 other members whom Leonardo gave aliases during interviews, though he refused to specify whom each alias referred to. Speedy, described as an anxious and paranoid man. He was a longtime friend of Leonardo and was the one responsible for scattering the rubbish in the woods. Most likely the alias of Pietro Tavano. The Monster, described as a tall, muscular man. He was an expert lockpicker, electrician, mechanic, and driver, and was very strong. Most likely the alias of Ferdinando Finotti. The Genius, a specialist in alarm systems. Most likely the alias of Simon, an electronics expert known to be linked to a series of robberies. The King of Keys, an older man. He was described as one of the best key forgers in the world. His true identity is unknown, and he remains the only member of the crew to escape apprehension by the police. The group conducted detailed surveillance of the Diamond Center, using camera pens to take pictures of the center and the vault covertly. Leonardo's frequent visits, under the guise of being a diamond merchant, caused security to become used to his presence, and thus lax. A small camera was hidden above the vault door by the group, being difficult to see when the ceiling lights were on. It would observe guards opening the door and record the combination he used. It would then broadcast its data to a sensor, which the group had hidden inside an ordinary-looking red fire extinguisher in a nearby storage room in the center. The extinguisher was fully functional, but had a watertight chamber hidden inside it, which housed electronics to receive the camera's data. The group allegedly practiced with a full-scale replica of the vault. Leonardo claims this was produced with help from a diamond trader insider. The day before the robbery, Leonardo visited the vault, posing as a routine visit. While inside, he quickly sprayed women's hairspray on the thermal motion sensors, having practiced the necessary motion for a swift spray, as the oil from the product was transparent but would temporarily insulate the sensor from thermal fluctuations in the room. And the sensor would only go off if it detected both heat and emotion. This would last many hours, but not forever, and the group used it as a temporary measure until they could properly disable the sensor system. While the security camera recorded his actions, the guard was used to his visits and was not paying attention. Leonardo remained in a nearby getaway vehicle during the robbery, listening to a police scanner and prepared to leave as soon as the group was done. The team wore plastic gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. To avoid a large number of security cameras in the area around the bank, the King of Keys picked the lock to an abandoned office building that adjoined the Diamond Center, as it shared a private garden with the Diamond Center that wasn't under video surveillance. The garden allowed access to a small balcony in the center, which the group accessed via a ladder. An infrared sensor monitored the terrace, but the genius used a large homemade polyester shield to hide his thermal signature as he approached the sensor and placed the shield in front of it, preventing it from detecting the group. He then disabled an alarm on the balcony's windows. Security cameras in the antechamber were covered with black plastic bags to allow the group to turn on the lights. The vault door had a magnetic lock on it that consisted of 2 plates. When on, they would trigger a magnetic field, and when the door opened, the field would break, triggering an alarm. The genius overcame this by using a custom-made aluminum plate, to which he attached heavy-duty double-sided tape to one side of it. He then stuck it on 2 bolts and unscrewed them. While they were loose from their proper position, they were still side by side and generating a magnetic field. They were pivoted out of the way and taped to the antechamber wall. The King of Keys had used video footage to successfully duplicate the almost impossible to duplicate foot-long vault key. However, during the robbery, he knew that the guards often visited the utility room just before opening the door and decided to investigate. Inside the unlocked room, he found the vault key. He decided to steal the original key, as it would ensure the vault's manufacturers did not realize the key could be duplicated, and indeed, it was not until Leonardo revealed this occurred that the police would know a duplicate had been created. The group turned off the antechamber lights before opening the vault door to avoid tripping light sensors in the vault. After the King of Keys picked the lock to the internal gate, the monster, working in darkness, moved to the middle of the room, having practiced the number of steps in the replica, reached up to the ceiling and pushed back a panel, locating the security system's inbound and outbound wires. An electric pulse shot along the wires, and if any sensor was tripped or broken, the circuit would break and trigger the alarm. To overcome this, the monster carefully stripped the wire's plastic coating and attached a piece of new wire to the exposed copper wire, rerouting the circuit and ensuring that it was irrelevant if the sensors were tripped. Heat sensors were blinded with styrofoam boxes and light sensors with tape. The men worked in darkness, having memorized the layout of the vault. They would occasionally flick on their lights for a brief moment to position their drill over the lockboxes. The King of Keys used a hand-cranked drill to break the locks on each of the security boxes. The contents were then emptied into duffel bags. After 5:30 a.m., they finished and left, returning to the office building, a process which took almost an hour due to the need for caution. They then put the bags in Leonardo's car, which then drove to the apartment while the men headed there on foot. Posed as an Italian diamond merchant to gain credibility, the robbery required 18 months of preparation. The group used a variety of ingenious methods to overcome the security systems and left investigators confused as to how they managed to successfully gain entry without triggering the security systems. The group was caught after Leonardo and Speedy went to dispose of the evidence of their plans, planning to burn it in France. Speedy was overcome with panic at the prospect of transporting such incriminating evidence and insisted they dispose of it in a nearby forest. However, Speedy suffered a panic attack and disposed of the evidence poorly, hurling it into the bushes and mud rather than burning it. Leonardo was busy burning his evidence, and when he discovered what Speedy had done, he decided it would take too long to gather everything up and they needed to leave, confident that nobody would find their rubbish. However, a local hunter owned the land and called the police when he found the rubbish the next day, believing it to be caused by local teenagers he had previously had disputes with. When he mentioned that some of the rubbish consisted of envelopes from the Antwerp Diamond Center, the police immediately investigated. The evidence from the rubbish was enough to allow the police to gain a lead, and they were eventually able to identify Leonardo from security footage from a nearby grocery store where he had purchased a sandwich. A receipt for the sandwich was amongst the rubbish. After the robbery, Leonardo and his team stole the security footage to conceal their identities. More than 123 out of 160 safe deposit boxes were forced open, each of which was made of steel and copper and had both a key lock and combination lock. Leonardo was found guilty of orchestrating the heist. He is considered to be the leader of a ring of Italian thieves called La Scuola di Torino, the School of Turin, who carried out the crime. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison by the Court of Appeal of Antwerp in 2005, but had since been released on parole in 2009. In 2011, a European arrest warrant was issued against him after he was found to have violated his parole conditions. One of these conditions was that he needed to compensate the victims of the heist, which he never made any attempt at. As a consequence, he was arrested again in 2013 at the Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris during a layover from the United States to Turin, and was made to serve the remainder of his prison sentence until 2017.